Perfect. Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Scholars Portal Days 2025, Building with Intention. My name is Gabby Crowley. I'm the Client Services Librarian at Scholars Portal, and I will be your host for Scholars Portal Days this year. We are delighted to have you all here with us. We have a really exciting program across both days this year, and we're really looking forward to some great presentations and conversations. So I'm going to get us started with a couple of housekeeping notes. So again, welcome. As you will have just heard, this session is being recorded, and the recordings will be posted to the Scholars Portal YouTube channel, probably in the next week or two. So you can keep an eye out for that. But we will also send an email to all registrants with that information, with the recordings as well. All the presentation slides for today, including these main set of slides, are available on SpotDocs, and I believe Katrina is kindly dropping some links in the chat as well to those. So feel free to hop over there, take a look at those, download and follow along if you would like. And yeah, those links are now in the chat. Thanks, Katrina. We also have live captions available today in English. Thank you so much to our live captioner, Lori from ScribeWire. So you can turn on captions using the live captioning Zoom bar at the bottom. And you can also view the captions in a separate browser window if you prefer with stream text. And again, there will be a link to that in the chat. In terms of questions and discussions for today, we'd ask that you please use the Q&A module for any questions that you have for the presenters or speakers. And then for any other conversations, discussion, things that aren't questions, please use the chat for that. Just keeping these two separate just helps us to keep an eye on things in terms of keeping track of questions so that nothing gets missed or lost amidst discussion. So yeah, if you don't mind, questions in the Q&A, and then any further discussion in the chat. One thing to double check, if we can just sort of take a quick moment here, I believe the default setting for everyone in chat is probably hosts and panelists only. So if you would like to chat with other attendees and not just the hosts and panelists, please just take a minute, open the little chat box, and at the bottom you should see the little blue drop down menu, and you can change that to everyone rather than hosts and panelists. So maybe just take a quick second to have a look at that. We'd ask you to be kind, considerate, and respectful. Of course, disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such behavior may find themselves removed from the call. So please be kind. We want to have a safe and welcoming environment for our conversations today. And finally, if you would like to chat about the event and have conversations about the event on social media, please feel free to use the hashtag that we're using for the event, which is hashtag SPDays25. You can also tag us in your posts as well, and we're on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and LinkedIn. So to begin our programming today, I do want to acknowledge the lands that we're on and that we're coming to you from today. And this is the land on which Scholars Portal operates and upon which most Scholars Portal staff live and work. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and to gather together on this land for conversations. We do encourage you to reflect on the land from which you're joining us today, as we have people from all across the country. I think we even have a few people joining us internationally as well. So please feel free to add your own land acknowledgement in the chat. I believe Katrina will drop a link to nativeland.ca if you want to take a moment to have a look and sort of learn a bit about the lands that you're on. And just as we talk today about building with intention, building mindfully, building with our values in mind in particular, and our values at the center of our work, we do really need to consider, these values and these considerations. They do include things like respect and care, sustainability, sovereignty, and reciprocity. And we're actually going to hear a lot about the importance of reciprocity in our keynote today. So that will be really great. A bit of an overview of the agenda. that we have planned for today. We're going to have some opening remarks in just a minute from Catherine Davidson. Then we're going to move into our keynote with Bianca Wylie. We will have some lightning talks. We're bringing back the second annual instance of the Slides of Spring, the Spring Slideshow. We'll have an update from the OCUL office, as well as an update on the OCUL AIML program. We'll have a couple more lightning talks, and then we'll do a brief wrap-up at the end for day one. If you would like to have a look at a more detailed agenda, that is available both at the Scholars Portal Days website, but the link is on the slides here and is in the chat as well. And the agenda is also available on Spot Docs, on that Spot Docs page as well. So I am now going to pass it over to Catherine Davidson from Ontario Tech University, who is also the chair of the Scholars Portal Operations and Development, or SPOD committee, who will give us some opening remarks. So over to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gabby. And I'm just watching the numbers climb, and we've broken the 200 mark, which is amazing. So it's my pleasure to give welcoming remarks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to open this mini conference, and thank you all for being here, whether you're joining us this afternoon or tomorrow, or both afternoons, as I plan to do. This year's theme is Building with Intention, as Gabby noted, invites us to think about not just what we create, but also how and why we create it. It's about slowing down enough to ask the right questions, aligning our work with our values, and making choices that have meaning. That spirit of intentionality is woven throughout every part of this conference, from the thoughtful programming to the collaborative planning to the spirit of generosity that reminds me just a little bit of the honeybee. See what I did there? Focused, efficient, and always contributing to the hive. So to our incredible organizing team, thank you. You have really shaped something thoughtful and engaging, and your hard work behind the scenes makes all of this possible. And to all of our speakers, thank you for your generosity in sharing your work, your ideas, and your insights. We are truly grateful for the time and care you've put into your contributions. We're especially looking forward to the lightning talks, which are those fast-paced, idea-packed sessions that remind us how much can be shared and said in a short time. They reflect innovation, creativity, and clarity, all rooted in intention. And in addition to those, I know, as Gabby mentioned, many of us are eager to hear from Amy and Catherine on their updates. Important work that grounds our conversations and connects our shared efforts across the board. And next to our keynote speaker, Bianca, thank you for anchoring our time together and helping us connect the dots between theme and practice. Your expertise in public engagement and technology brings a timely and important lens to our discussions, and invites us to reflect on how we build intentionally, not only within our own work, but importantly, how we connect with broader communities. And that bit that Gabby noted around reciprocity certainly resonates for me, so I'm very interested to hear more. And then I also want to extend appreciation for the French language content offered tomorrow. C'est un vrai plaisir d'inclure du contenu en français cette année. Merci à celles et ceux qui le rendent possible. And finally, if you need a moment to rest your brain between sessions, I highly recommend checking out the spring slideshow at the break. A gentle reminder that sometimes building intention starts with a walk outside and a well-timed daffodil. So thank you again for being here. And with that, I'm turning it back to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was a really wonderful note for us to start out on today. So thank you so much for the kind and thoughtful remarks, as always, as we can always expect from you. I'm now really excited to introduce our keynote speaker for this year, Bianca Wylie. Bianca is a writer with a dual background in technology and public engagement. She is a partner at Digital Public, where she leads work on public interest technology and advocacy. She worked for several years in the tech sector in operations, infrastructure, corporate training, and product management. Then as a professional facilitator, she spent several years co-designing, delivering, and supporting public consultation processes for various city governments and government agencies, including projects that focused on library operations, urban planning, and park design. She founded the Open Data Institute Toronto in 2014 and co-founded Civic Tech Toronto in 2015. And she sits on the advisory board of the Electronic Privacy Information Center. So Bianca's talk today is entitled Power of the Landed Question on technology, reciprocity, and authority. So thank you so much for joining us, Bianca. We're absolutely thrilled to have you. So I'm going to pass it over to you now. Take it away. I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Catherine. I'm gonna get this going here. Okay. I am so excited to be here, and to start, I'm going to set a timer because honestly, I'm often the most excited for the conversation we have at the end. So I'm setting a timer for 43 minutes. So we'll go off. In continuity with the opening remarks and with the work everyone's doing right now toward building with intention, I want to say that everything I'm sharing here is in the spirit of working in public. And so I would really appreciate and feel it would be generous of anyone here when I say something, if you feel like, no, that doesn't fit, or that's not helpful to this context, or to challenge and to see if we can tussle in some of the details, because I think the details is where so much of our politics lives. And we're all doing our best right now, but we are in difficult times as always, but there's a lot of exciting work to do. So I would say that in terms of how, sorry, let's make sure, here we go. In terms of how we're going to organize this time, at a high level, I'm going to speak for a bit in the abstract, thinking about continuity when we think about technology. A lot of narrative and discourse around technology really invites us to be ahistorical, almost as though there is no past, it is only future. That, of course, is not true. And if we're going to grapple and build things well and use them well together, we have to take into consideration all the undone work from before. And then for the remainder of time, really going to focus us in on landing some of this thinking on the ground and in our day-to-day lives and in the decisions we make and in the ways that we work together and in the ways that we live together. So that's basically the outline. And something Catherine mentioned around how and why is so much the focus here, is not yes or no, but the how and the why. And thank you for the thoughtful land acknowledgement and the offers for others to share. I'm joining you from Parkdale in Toronto, and I just wanted to suggest this book for anyone who might be in Toronto. It provides a lot of great context to history, but also to the present day. And in particular, there is a chapter in this book called Remember Like We Do by Ange Loft. And in it, Ange's work, some of it relates to treaties and how to live a treaty. And she makes mention, this is imperfect, but of the danger of writing things down. And I feel like that thought is really germane to the remarks that I'm going to share here, because I think in this point in time, we've got a lot written down. We have less confidence in some ways on how to act, how to be, how to do, and the limits of language, and how do we turn the corner sometimes into the practicing the how of how we do things together. I want to share this story with you because it also, I think, encapsulates everything to follow. I got my driver's license pretty late in my life, and I feel like I'm a pretty benevolent, fairly cautious driver. And I had this incident occur a couple months ago where I was trying to make a right-hand turn on a red light. And as I was doing that, I was apparently doing it a little bit aggressively. And a crossing guard stepped out in front of my vehicle, blew their whistle at me, and really gave me a look. And first, it worked. That level of exchange and that use of authority worked. I stopped, stopped trying to make the turn. And I continued on. But I've reflected on that incident a lot because I think it is instructive in a few ways. One of them is scale. And if we look at the degree to which automobiles in our roads are regulated, they're regulated to a high degree. Even the move I was making to turn right on a red light, it's legal. So it's not a question of law. It's a question of how are you following the law? So there's a humility to acknowledging that the scale of an intersection, which is, 4 paths of travel, and one person have authority to manage and negotiate, and that we may need to understand that having embodied authority, which I think is what is represented by a person, is important. In Toronto, we have, last I looked, about 900 crossing guards. They play an important role. And the other thing to say, in safety and how we move together, but they land in this place that is not as punitive or carceral. I left that exchange. I don't have a record of that happening. I'm telling you that it's happening, but I didn't leave with some kind of mark on my record or an incident report that had happened. But it also relied on this crossing guard doing their job in a way that they really were confident and comfortable with their authority. I don't know about you, but I've seen crossing guards who are almost apologetic. They're sort of like holding the sign up and it's like, sorry, I have to slow this down. This crossing guard was not. And so I think there's a lot there. And I think a lot of that, if we think about scale, if we think about embodied authority, if we think about, is our problem rules and regulations? No, we have a lot of those. Is it enacting them? Seems to be a bit of it. I think we can think about this role in this case, the context and the opportunity not to have a highly punitive interaction that has ongoing consequence. So to roll us back up from that small intersection, this is Ursula Franklin. I became aware of her work, I don't know when now, but probably 5-6 years ago. And she was a lot of things. She was an engineering professor at the University of Toronto. She was a climate activist. She was a political activist across a lot of fronts. She worked on democracy. And this is what I'm fascinated by at the moment. She was a pacifist, and her practice of her politics came out in all different ways. But she did a series of lectures in 1989 called The Real World of Technology. And they're fantastic. As you'll note, that's before the internet. So she did a bit of an update after that, after the internet, and thought a bit about that what she had put forward in current time. But they're very timeless lectures, and I would recommend them. The reason, though, that I'm stuck on her pacifism is because it feels critical to me, and particularly in this point in time, that the idea of nonviolence and that the idea of living in peace, or at least making efforts toward that, should be on the table. I think many of you might have heard more recently abolition. I think we hear abolition more than we hear pacifism. But that's a big, unwieldy concept. But to my mind, how we practice and think about bringing that into practice is very important. And if you look at the political moment we're in Canada, there's a lot of, I would say, very narrow thinking about issues like sovereignty that is immediately reverting to military investment. We know a lot of technology is with us today because of military investment. There wasn't a business model required, and then it got dumped out into civilian use. So the military is tightly, tightly, tightly bound to our world of technology. But how we think about pacifism or abolition or living these kinds of values that one day we would hope, that we don't have to continue to feel that genocide is, and the dehumanization that we see in a genocidal context, as we see right now. We see this in Gaza, we see this in Palestine. This is something that doesn't occur only over there. It occurs because dehumanization is living with us in our lives, for everyone who's here, where you are living now, These are not separate containers. And so when we think about that, we do have power, responsibility, and authority to try to carry with us in our local, our domestic, and our international efforts. And I'm going to have a few book recommendations today, but one of them is The Force of Nonviolence by Judith Butler. And I'm turning a corner here, which is to start to point us toward the idea of interdependence, which eventually we get to the idea of reciprocity as well. But Judith Butler wrote this book, and it rhymes in some of the thinking in terms of there really only is a collective. There is no sense there really is no individual. This idea that we live with, and it's so predominant in our world, isn't true. And if you go back into the political worlds in which we've been living for a long time, like I'm 46, for as long as I've been engaged in politics, it's been under neoliberal constructs. So you go back in time and listen to Margaret Thatcher saying, there's no such thing as society. Wendy Brown, who's a political theorist, she wrote about the idea that even for the founders of neoliberalism, where we are at today is beyond their wildest dreams. So I say these things because in a point in time where we want to think about solidarity or humanity, collective action in practice, we can't go there if we're not clear and open-eyed about the degree to which we're highly atomized and we have normalized immense amounts of dehumanization, both very locally and anywhere else you see it. And so this is the corner that we are all hopefully trying to turn, and we're not all going to turn it in the same way. But what this has brought me to, and this is why I'm so excited to think about this with all of you, because I imagine you're thinking some of the same things, is, you know, how do we, in our daily life, with our authority, with our power, how do we continue to try to keep pushing toward liberation and toward shared collective life that is, you know, that humanizes all of us, that everything, that there's a safety in the values that we share. And the thing that I bring to you today, this is this question that I've been stuck with for the better part of at least a year, because I've worked in law, I've worked in policy, I've worked in advocacy, I've worked in setting up, you know, ideas for how do we build standards, what do we do for compliance. I've got this inclination that the ways that we have dealt with technology by abstracting a lot of the rules around it to national and international levels is almost making us forget that we have local power and that it's very differently shaped and would be enacted differently. And so to say this with more specificity, in particular to technology, again, my whole political life, I have mostly heard discourse about rights, whether it's civil rights, privacy rights. There's lots of different rights around we're having issues around this right now in terms of your right to association, right to expression. Rights, okay, yes, important, of course. Almost above all of them, there's this idea that freedom is the ultimate right. Rights are only as good as our access to them. This is a long-standing saying. People who understand issues and access to justice know about this one. The point is that you can't have rights without their flip. The flip of the coin is responsibilities. So the way that we have consistent access to rights, and you all the way to human rights, is if more of us understand that we have a collective responsibility to making sure that there's infrastructure for those rights to be upheld. I think we've seen this in human rights particularly. If your human right, I've seen this at the City of Toronto, where you say you hear people saying on council floor, a friend of mine passed away last week, you know, housing is a human right, but there's nowhere to go knock on the door to collect that right. So there's this major gap between the rights as stated in paper, and again, stuff that's written down, and their enactment and their access. And that issue for me is, again, if we're clear-eyed and we agree that, yeah, we probably have some more work to do, quite an opportunity. because then it points us a little bit to a different mode of thinking, which is, okay, if the rights are there and there's been some degree of agreement upon them, what is my job to make sure that people's rights are upheld and that they're upheld before they're challenged in a court? And the reason I think this is all becoming even more of the moment is when the rule of law starts to implode, you really do see what limitations it holds. You really don't want everything to be structured in a way that you have to go pursue access to justice in a court of law. Never mind how long that can take, but that hasn't been functioning well to date. So if we agree about this issue, there's a few other things to bring us down to the ground here, and we'll turn into talking about the method of how we can think about some of these issues. If we agree that we need to work at a smaller scale and that we need to scope in, we could also think that we have a different set of principles for us, or values, or things that we would say we can all point to and say, you know what, having some humility in this moment, probably very helpful. Pragmatism also very helpful. It doesn't feel as big, and I think a lot of the ways we've talked about democracy, for example, has been with this really intense sense of like, well, this is the good way and this is the good path and this is how we're going to get to better collective living arrangements. I want to share with you that democracy is awful. I have run public meetings. I can tell you with certainty, it is an extremely difficult, extremely tiring, tiresome, requires immense amounts of patience, requires immense amounts of time. And one of the things you learn when you work in a democratic context is that being right is the easy part of democracy. It's not what it's about. It's about how do you find the conditions under which people can live together. And that's not the same as consensus necessarily. And so if you look at these, I hope you see in the humility and the pragmatism and the opportunities that we all have every day to say, you know what, I don't have to solve the macro here. We have some decent frameworks. We also have frameworks that I think with time may eventually just erode and go away. But it's these kinds of principles that you kind of have to have a confidence and not always know what everyone else is doing at different scales or in different locations. You have to believe in the collective in a way. And I think that's the kind of trust that is so critical right now, because we are talking a lot about trust, and we will talk about that again. If anyone has heard of this book, it's an interesting way to think this concept through, which is rather than trying to build, this is an organizing book. It really looks at how to think about political change. And it offers the idea that we can work in sort of adjacencies rather than everyone has to do the same thing. Because this idea of everyone getting on board and everybody universalizing and either centralizing or repeating, we see where it can be successful, but it also leaves a lot of work undone. And so trying again to think, can we look at our work at a smaller scale and still know that we're responding to those big themes about justice, about reciprocity, about living collectively, working collectively, about really extending humanity to every single person, regardless of whether or not you agree with them. That does happen at a micro, but you have to really believe that not everyone has to do what you do, and you have to do something different, and all these things alongside each other will add up. So before we make that final turn into how to land some of this in our work, I thought this was such a profound summary of what technical arrangements do, and technology, digital infrastructure, however we want to software, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I'm just going to share a few thoughts with this up, because when the AI conversation started, it really began to feel silly. It felt like conversations were being had where you could just say anything you wanted. You didn't need proper nouns. You didn't need anyone who was working with the subject matter that was being discussed. You didn't need to consider history. Everything was forward, 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 forward. And if we reflect for a moment on this observation, which was made again in 1989, it's interesting to bring it back into that bigger political construct. So I have, when I say that we're living under pretty severe neoliberal austerity right now. And even with the new government, the language is sounding quite neoliberal. So if we're saying that this is where we are today, if we go back to when the statement was made, when Ursula Franklin made the statement that technical arrangements reduce or eliminate reciprocity, you can go back to a point in time. There's a book that really I find helpful, also written before the internet, called Voltaire's Bastards by John Ralston Saul. He wrote a book before the internet, which argued that we had gone from religious dogma, we being Western Enlightenment thinking, gone from a context in history where religion was dogma to a point in history where rational thinking was dogma, that the only way we could make decisions anymore was rational thinking. And John makes a point to say that the opposite of rational isn't irrational, it's non-rational, which to me points us to cultural questions in terms of values and morals and ethics. So if John is right, and if you read this book, it's quite fascinating because it argues that we just make decisions, and you can go back in time and think about all these systems, how rational the bureaucracy is. You know, there's a great article Joni Penn wrote about like AI thinks like a corporation. All of that sort of binary and all of the ideas of rational thinking and scientific thinking, that we don't have a different way to make a decision together. I would argue that thesis is right. And I would argue that that thesis was valid before the internet came along. And so now we're living in a time where rational thought has been supercharged by technology. And I think what it's leaving us with is a real cultural problem. And so what I'm going to speak to next is that I don't think we have a knowledge problem. I think we have incentive problems. I think we have culture problems. And I think we need to figure out and acknowledge that we're not missing written ideas on what we should be doing or what we should be doing differently, but we're missing the soft, challenging pieces of how do we work together differently, or how do we take the power that we have that isn't relegated to the domains of, is this legal, is this not, is this a norm, is an interesting question, because a norm is in some cases just what we agree we want to do. And there's a lot more power sitting on the table in that area right now than I would argue there is in laws and policies. So do we need more laws and policies and standards and compliance? Is this going to get us out of the rut we're in right now? I would argue no. And so for all of us, this is a challenging point in time because the culture is so dominant on rational thought. And the reason I have the word real underlined here is because real, and in Ursula Franklin's idea, she wanted to talk about what it was, not technology in the abstract, but how did it land in the world? What did it look like in life? And she modeled this lecture on one done by C.B. McPherson, who is a political scientist, called The Real World of Democracy. And then it's like, I know there's a name for this. I just started to see the word real in so many different writers' work in the last few months. And I think that this is that intention, is how do we break through to go down to the ground with the practical and start to talk at the scale where we see ourselves in relation, not just to the technologies that we're using, but to each other in an appropriate way. Because everything being so abstracted, it really encourages dehumanization. When you abstract people into data, it's dehumanizing for sure. And closing note on this thinking is that if we look at the history of regulation in Canada in regards to technology, around the year 2000 was when PIPEDA, which was the federal law that sets the rules for the private sector use of data, came into effect. It was designed primarily to make sure that data could move around the world to support the market. of products that saw data as this next economic opportunity. And that was 25 years ago. We decided to make data an object, to make it a thing, when in fact, data is nothing other than a proxy for all kinds of relationships and their people. So you fast forward to today, and again, with AI, this idea that AI can somehow be an object and abstract it away from all the people, all the relationships, all the consequences feels like an error, and it feels like we're making exactly the same mistake we made with data. And what all of us here have probably been exposed to in working with technologies is that privacy, for example, privacy is very important, but privacy is an enabling construct. If something is privacy preserving, then it's fine to go. Everyone here can probably acknowledge there's a lot of technology that, whether it's privacy preserving or not, is not helping us along in having good, coherent, grounded relationships with each other. And so if you think about the fact that the bulk of what is happening in our worlds of automation, it will never be illegal. Efficiency will not be illegal. Deskilling people will not be illegal. Automation will not be illegal. So if we understand that laws might look at the edges of things, the bulk of the consequence of new technologies do not get caught by law. And if we know this, we can also challenge some of even the overarching narratives about danger, because we kill people in spreadsheets. We have to be careful that we're not orienting on an object when what we actually need to understand are the people and the power dynamics behind them, and that's where we need to intervene. So that's up there, that's I would say up there in terms of the ideas that have brought us to here in some ways, in terms of how we think about regulation. The world of neoliberalism is an exhaustive challenge, particularly in the world of public interest technology. And as I'm pointing at here, if we think about the relationships of consumerism to the way that most technology is not designed for a collective audience. You've been through this in library world with, is it consumer, patron, user? It's all pointing, it's all narrowing. It's going into, is this good for this person, this user? Some software, yes, you have an administrative layer, or it's built for teams, or. But at the end of the day, there's a lot, and this goes back to Ursula Franklin's point about reciprocity, where there isn't a back and forth. It's really, and efficiency can be good and efficiency can be problematic. And so if we look at a lot of the constructs of what is sold to us as good technology, it can actually be quite a compliant, and this is that the construct can really make it hard to do anything other than the one way, than that prescriptive way of operating. And so even though some of these sound maybe mildly neutral, or the idea that, have it be a friction-free, seamless user experience, like, okay, but there's a lot getting, sort of driven over in there. There's a lot that happens in friction, and we know this. We talk a lot about this in technology. So if we think about the flip of that, and we think about building with intention, we come more to this idea of necessary slowness. I've been really exposed in listening to people who work in disability justice circles, working on organizing, working on, as we're still in a pandemic, what to do as more and more people are experiencing chronic fatigue, experiencing disablement. How do you be inclusive of people if you're going real fast all the time? You're not. I can tell you that. Democratic process is mind-numbingly slow if you're really going to bring people along as a convener. But this difficulty and this willingness to, famous Donna Haraway, stay with the trouble, this is important. And this is where I'm sticking myself. I'm, with technology and the way we talk about it, a lot of the time I stop and I think we can't solve any of these problems in the technology. It's what we're doing around them. And again, I would welcome anyone who maybe hasn't been as exposed to writing and to work in disability circles. Pluralism is just a given. There are so many different ways to think about this and this and this and this together, not that model of we won, we lost, you know, like this binary, even within advocacy or public interest thinking. It's not particularly productive to getting us to a place where there's a lot of coexistence. And this, again, if you think in the Canadian context, it is very inefficient to understand nation to nation to nation to nation to nation. I could go on, federalism. But that's, in a lot of cases, the kind of thinking we, you know, that we should be doing, and dependent on how we want to have patience and slow down and stop seeing productivity as the goal. You know, you hear a lot of the saying, you got to be sand in the gears. It's counterintuitive, but this is precisely a moment of where slowing down might be the most radical thing anyone can do. Because as we accelerate with automation, you just continually narrow, you homogenize, you go to the center, when what we need to be doing is actually branching out and to go more toward a collective way of thinking where there's multiple things true at the same time. Humans are awful at knowing there's always generally at least two truths at the same time. So here I am as someone who's worked mostly in the public sector, public interest technologies. Some of this may or may not be perfectly matched to all of the work that you're doing and the construct in which you work. But a few themes or considerations that I've seen that I just want to touch on, and I'll come back to that slide. But basically, there's a point at which it starts to break everyone when we're pretending that what we're doing is in the public interest or that it's good for the general public. And I'm a John Dewey fan, the publics. It does something to all of us when we're all pretending that something's going on when it's not, and knowing that it feels too difficult to step out of the pretend. But there is a major, major moral cost to participating in pretend economies. And a lot of us have to do this in workspace. And so why I say that is because I'm going to bring us back to the power of the question for a moment. In the advocacy work that I've done, a lot of the time in the slowing down, some of the best questions to ask relate to, how is this serving our mandate? If this is our established mandate, if this is what our service model is supposed to look like, if this is what we're doing for people, if this is what we're funded to do, let's hold that up beside some of what we're seeing. And we are living in a very difficult time. I just want to reinforce, austerity is doing things to all of us, where it's not like you're being handed tons of budget to build whatever you want. You're probably thinking about sharing and devolved models of sharing infrastructure, but some centralized systems are not going away. Decentralized systems create their own kinds of mess when you have to uphold standards for people. But if we look at this and we think about each of these places as, you know, if we think about centralized, decentralized, and devolved infrastructure systems, they all have strengths and weaknesses. So you don't want to assume any of them are good or any of them are bad. You want to think about that and say, okay, let's lay these out and start to think about the opportunities in the places where there are strengths. Vendors and related dependencies. Again, I have been in many cases where there is such poor choices even of tooling on the market that you see it's like a hostage situation with the public sector. And they have a vendor, and the vendor is doing terrible work for them, and there's no alternative, and everyone's scared to get out of the contract because they're scared they'll get sued. The public sector has not made great choices to date. This is a massively broad brush, but I've been in too many of these and looked at too many procurements to understand, like, this is not a high fidelity in terms of supporting public interest in the design of a lot of what's on the market for the public sector. I would love if this is the case where it's different. I would also say that unionization is becoming a more and more interesting piece for me to look at as a tactical opportunity for leverage in procurement. I say that because there is a matching set of incentives where workers have a very vested interest in saying how the tools that they have to use at work should be designed, how they should be used for maintenance, everything else. And so this isn't common, but this feels like an opportunity we should be thinking about in the cases where it might make sense. because descaling and automation are very, very real. And again, I have to say, I hope you're not living the same, but for me, some of the most enthusiastic people who want to automate things are the senior management and the leaders in a lot of public institutions, even professions. And I know we're all stuck in between the rocks and hard places, but I've heard different professions talk about like, well, it's better that we have this than nothing. And it's kind of like, I don't know that that's a good bar. I think this is dangerous because there's no one behind us. This is the public sector. And so I say this because descaling and automation, there's very little regulation around these issues. In some cases, at best, it relates to surveillance with technology. It certainly doesn't relate to the issues we've seen for decades about how many public servants have to use tools that are awful. They're awful for them to use, and they're awful for the people on the other side of it. And the last place here that I've seen, and it's gone through a wave and it's unfortunate, but we've got to figure out what to do, is that having communities of practice is such a nourishing space for a lot of us, because we are working outside the lines. And I think if we know that we have to work outside the lines, better to do that as collectively as possible, and better to do that in ways that feel somewhat safe, you know. And I think like this is sometimes we have to figure out ways to use adversarial engagement, unfortunately. I'm saying this from my side of the world, which is as an advocate, I often have had to say things that lots of people inside the government knew and had told people that they worked for, but no one was listening. So sometimes the message has to come from a different place to say, this is how this has to work. It's not, and this shows us again, the necessity of working beside each other, but not always pointing at the same goal necessarily explicitly. So, and that is probably the most, that is the exemplar of the slide where you're like, that is not our lives. Like, I hope you will help me learn more. So in terms of bringing these two things together as the power of the question, the power of the processes, the number one thing I have had success with over and over and over again in advocacy is that I don't have to solve the problem. I have to ask the people in power what they're doing about the problem. Sometimes that is the most important step you can take, and it's quite freeing because you don't have to resolve everything, but you do have to say, someone here is accountable. Someone here has to have an answer for these questions. And even if what you do in your lifetime is make some of the pretending uncomfortable, that is a step in the right direction, because it is breaking us to pretend we're doing things in some cases for the public interest, the public's interest, or for when it's so, we're so far gone. Like, this is not it. We are not always doing that anymore. So you don't have to know the answer to questions. You have to be willing to ask them. And there's also something that really brings a humility to conversations, because if I'm asking a question and I'm not worried, and again, we can get into the degrees of comfort you have with asking questions, but it's a micro, it's a small thing. You're not asserting a big, position on something. You're saying, I want to engage with this topic. And it might seem small, but it lends itself to allowing other people to participate. And how are we building this? What are we doing with this? Which brings to the idea of landing the question. And so the reason I started with that book, in addition to, following along with the land acknowledgement, is that Toronto is a specific place with specific history. It has specific treaty, current treaty, and more recent treaty, and not all the lands in Canada are treated. This is just one example. But we're not operating in abstract. We're operating in specific geographies with specific people, with specific authorities. And that goes, there's macros and micros of that. So this is what I'm bringing as maybe this is helpful in the work you're doing, because this is helpful to me right now. We have had very thoughtful philosophers think about questions of technology and society and democracy. And this is, and Lori, I apologize because when I shared the slides, Lori's doing our captioning. I hadn't included these. I'm not trying to step through every one of these. I just wanted to show you that these questions are available to us. L.M. Sakasas is a philosopher who does a lot of work on Illich. So he did a pack of questions. This is a sample of them. So Ursula Franklin, 1989, I've got a link to all of these. L.M. Sakasis, 2015, about technology, Wendell Berry, Neil Postman. The point is that people have thought long and hard and deep about technology and its impact on us. What we might be able to do now, because of the point in time we live in, is to take those questions and to put them into the processes that we have. So at a sectoral level, if we bring these kinds of questions into things that are listed here, we can start to slow down and expand. And I'm gonna pull a couple of these out, for example. Say you work with the software. It is a nightmare for some things. Some of it's great, some of it's terrible. Okay, if you know the renewal is coming, rather than get to that point and say, oh no, okay, well, I guess we just have to accept this. You back up 6 months from that point in time and you start to say, okay, hold on. How do we approach this differently next time? Because we know we have to keep this thing. We know it's not working. What do we do? Because you're not going to figure that out when you get the email about renewing the license. You're going to need to be strategic about that in the time leading up to it. And if you use some of these questions to land them specifically into things like a negotiation, procurements, maintenance, your job descriptions, maybe you sometimes bring things out to the public, because that's sometimes how you build that power that is really difficult to create from inside your organizations. These are all up for grabs, but the idea is, how do we take these questions and this depth of thought, which is about justice and is about power, and bring it into the micro? Because there's lots of places here where you don't have to ask anybody's permission to do this. It does take time. But if you kind of come together as colleagues and within institutions and saying, we really do need to have an approach to this, there's lots of little pieces of scaffolding. And you're much better off doing something like this at this scale, because again, this is an Ursula Franklin thing. You kind of like go off to the side, do your little experiment. Like, you don't need to mount a massive campaign with, I'm saying this, I'm not trying to denigrate that approach. What I'm saying is that approach alone isn't getting us there. So we need to start to think about smaller things. I am not efficient in a lot of things I do, and I found that good relationships are by definition inefficient. And so having the humility to understand that sometimes we have to have meetings. And I realize you might not want to do that, or you might find it boring, or you might find it unproductive. The reality is we need to do a lot of meetings is how a lot of democracy gets done. So I think we need to, and sometimes challenge which places we're efficient. And as I proposed here, there is no responsible AI, there's no ethical AI, there's no moral AI. Like, it's never going to happen in the object. It's going to happen around it. And it's going to happen all the way down to this really small piece of relationship with others, maybe with one other person in your organization where they're doing something and you have to be like, okay, this isn't going to be comfortable, but like, we can't do that thing, all the way down to yourself. Because the hardest person to slow down enough with is ourselves often. And we have to go down to a speed where we can reflect. And if we're upset or offended by something, that we can stop and say, okay, I'm going to have to like work on myself here in order to come back to the table, because other people are not going to agree with you all the time. And yet we still have to move forward together with shared values. So I'm going to close with this image of a typewriter, because as a somewhat cliched romantic, I tried using a typewriter for a while. My friend told me it was a bad idea. They're mostly right. But what this had in it was mine was somewhat like this. It would, if you tried to go too fast, it would jam. Like, the machinery had a regulation. It was self-regulated in a way. And we don't have a lot of that. We've got nothing slowing us down for the most part. We've got a lot of encouragement to go faster. And so I'll just close on that note, which is to say that the speed with which we operate, the slower we go, the more careful we can be. I know a lot of us know this, but it is a truly radical motion to slow down and be present enough and to be in good relationship with others. And so I would encourage at all points in time where you can pick a few places to be sand in the gears, that I don't think there's any other way toward building with intention than in some points in time having to slow down and figure out how to renegotiate all this power that we do have, which I think and know we have a lot of, but it's not going to look, it's not packaged up for us in the ways that is evident. So I think culturally, this is part of the corner that we need to turn. So I would really welcome conversation about any of this, and I'm so grateful for the chance to think with you about it.
Thank you so much, Bianca. That was fantastic. I have a whole page in my notebook full of notes now, and book recommendations and just scribbles from all of that. Thank you so much. I'll give folks a minute to sort of get their thoughts together and ponder their reflections, and to please put any questions into the Q&A. We do have some lovely comments in the chat. Some love for Ursula Franklin. Dana also recommends or also enjoyed Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy. Recommended her other book as well. Alicia had noted that she loves that you're considering a pragmatic angle and sort of the connection with linguistic pragmatics as well. Typewriter metaphor, lots of love for that. Yeah. Catherine, by the questions, do you mean the questions that are in the slides, or the link that Dan just dropped in there? The questions that were in the slides, the slides are on Spot Docs. So if you would like to have those to reflect back on, those are in the agenda on Spot Docs, and you can grab those there. It is the updated version from this morning. Perfect. Something that I was thinking about. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was laughing because I had these different, as I mentioned to you, Gabby, I'm like working, every day I'm like, oh, what should I do? What am I reading? And after finding this real world over and over again, it was just fascinating, because in this Wendell Berry book, I'm not sure if people are familiar with his work, but they were just talking about like a real conversation and how this is about context. And then I'm over here reading Care Work, which is about disability justice. And the author talks about the fact that like, it's just so messy to do, where this, it was in here. It's really messy and human to do care work, like and so it's real. And it was just about like, we really need to get real. And then the final, roll up of all of that, of course, was that I remembered that was the Velveteen Rabbit.
I wondered when this was going to come in.
Right?
I saw mention of the Velveteen Rabbit. And
well, and I knew I couldn't, I wanted to read from it, but I knew I'd probably start crying. So it's
fair enough.
Well, yeah. And it's a, I think there's something that you come to when we talk about humility, of just knowing we really have to work on ourselves. We really have to understand that we're good. We can go out there, we can disagree. We need to feel safe to disagree with each other and not get thrown to the side. And that's one of the things I love about, the concept of abolition, is you don't throw anyone away. You got to figure it out. And I do think that's why so much of the work that we have to do right now is softer. And another one, like I'm a Wittgenstein fan, who, there's a real limit to language. And all of us just we're so steeped in it. And AI is fascinating in some ways because it is completely trained both on historical patterns, which language. I would say, yeah, we don't want anymore. And then on top of it, language. So it's like sticking us both in the past and in linguistic constructs that are like, the opposite of what we need to do if we need to breathe more life into these things. So, I wish that in some ways, because of how, love makes you real. Yeah, exactly. It's like it is this, and it's soft. And I do think maybe for everyone's sake here, just to land this, because I think with the soft, a lot of people get uncomfortable because it feels less clear what to do. But I would say there's a very clear connection between the rise of the far right and a willingness to tap into the romantic, the individual, the pastoral, the values, there's a thing here that you can't fight that with rationalism. And there's another book called From the Ruins, which Dugald Hines wrote. And his argument was he was a climate activist for 10 years. And he said, you can't keep yelling science at people. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I think we've seen that with COVID as well. So it's difficult because this isn't about one or the other, it's about balance. But I'd say we're just really culturally, it's difficult, and you want someone to give you instructions and you want protocol, right?
The comfort and sort of the structure of
and the certainty. And I think unfortunately in uncertain times you almost have to like create that comfort with the uncertainty, because that's where there's power. I think so
I enjoyed the point about like that the opposite of rational is not irrational, but it's non-rational as well.
Well, because it is difficult with moral, and I think that's probably why it's become really uncomfortable to be stewing in the moral, ethical, responsible, all the words that get packed in front of a technology, when like those are not, it's almost like an escapism, like, oh, let's just punt the word over there in front of the technology.
To transfer the responsibility of the more, the cultural, the non-rational elements to the technology rather than discussions around it.
To each other.
Yeah. Okay, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A now. So a question from Joe. As a recent new manager, I can see how this is more easily encouraged from top down, and I really appreciate all the points made here. Are there recommendations for approaches to suggesting slowing down or mindful timing of managing licensing, sort of for that library context, when you are not a manager?
Yeah, I think great question. And I think documentation, this is kind of like this email should have been a meeting. When I would run meetings, there's so much power in writing things down and making good notes about why the thing that is bad, and not to the point where you're in the weeds where no one wants to hear about it, but enough that you can connect it to a manager's understanding of like, you're accountable for this. This thing is not doing this well. There's a danger. I'm an in the weeds person, so I've learned many times where people are just like, they're just like, I don't care. Can it work? I don't care what you're talking about. I just want to know if this will work. But I do think the documentation and the persistence is really critical, because we have an audience a lot of the time for like griping and complaining, and we do that with each other, which is really important. I think that's important for mental health. But you would be surprised at how successful persistence is. And so when someone starts to receive, it's like, oh, this is the 7th time this thing is being written down and documented, and it's being like, then someone starts to feel a bit of heat, like, oh, the thing I've told you about monthly for 17 months that is like continually causing trouble. So I would say document it if you're not in a managerial position. And for me, it's interesting that Joe mentioned this from the top, because I work and I think a lot from the non-traditional power place, which is the holding other people accountable and trying to think about how to support other people's authorities, and to say, okay, no, actually you do have this power here. The other thing I would mention is to try to bond together in the translation of technical requirements and technical work, so that you find the right language set to describe some of the problems, because sometimes you really just need to use different words, and then it starts to matter to someone. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the writing it down and the communicating broadly and persistently. And it's tactically, it succeeds a lot, but it's work, it's grindy work.
Yeah, I think especially something with when working with vendors. I'm sure we've all sent, the 17th email of this still isn't working, we still don't have access to this, or something like that. Yeah, hopefully eventually it sort of pushes through. You've got the record for it.
Yeah, and to that end, I also think we have to go a little sometimes sideways with the legal, understanding that a lot of things like cities are corporations. Once you understand how much resides in the legal department and how that never goes anywhere beyond and you can't see it, is sometimes just understanding that the power dynamic has to be switched. If a vendor is getting away with a problematic thing and there's no alternative in the market, then you have to start to think what leverage do I have? Because we do have to go toward incentives. And even if it's just one of the most unsatisfying things about working in technology advocacy is often you just better the terms of a bad thing, You don't often get it to go away, but if you're saving money because that's your leverage, is to say, look, you don't want to fix this, that's fine. I understand. Also, I'm not paying this thing anymore then.
Right.
And then you start to take power in the budget, right? Like these budgets are moral documents, as is said and is true. So it's like trying to think around in different ways if you're not getting responses.
Yeah, very true. Okay, second question from Alicia. It's like we need a shorthand for this. Whenever one of us tries to slow down, for example, in meetings, and encounters resistance because it's very uncomfortable, I need for there to be a way of referring to this intention, naming it for others, because it's so easy to interpret the gestures of slowing down as something else, potentially as being unnecessary, as something being irrelevant. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for this?
This is so real. I just want to acknowledge it as a starting point.
It's real.
It's so real. No, it's just such a real thing. I have found just in my little like communication, sometimes if I show up to a meeting and it was a meeting I'm not prepared for. So some of this is you have to make yourself vulnerable to say like, I want to slow this down because I didn't read everything. And then you see everyone being like, neither did I, right? Like this is this pretending where it's like, okay, so let's all stop pretending we know the thing. It is shocking in some cases as you rise up, like how much more comfortable people get with pretending. And so this is a weakness that needs to be exploited, because if no one's actually reading the thing, it's a problem. So I think some of it comes to having a confidence and a vulnerability to say the thing that you know other people, like no one's, it's a bit of, has to be shared. But I also think one of the tactical approaches to this, and this also comes down to how collegiate, how you all work together and across different places, is you meet before the meeting. You know, like there's some of this you just, and this goes down to like slowing entire procedural decision-making supply chains and just like dragging them out and saying, okay, hold on, let's make sure that we agree on this before we head into this place and slow it down together. I've seen some of the most egregious instances of power where like elected officials say things on the floor to the public and no one in the public service knows what they were just signed up to do. So you see this all the time, this sort of lack of coordination in moving towards something. And in public engagement circles, like you generally do sort of an internal consultation prior to going to, you know, different groups. So this is another way, is just to make sure that you're slowly building relationships and vocalizing this. And honestly, one of the things that would come up a lot with people is saying, like, if you want to make fast decisions, go for it. I can guarantee you that they're not, in the way the power dynamic is shaped, that is not to your benefit. And so another tactic I have found with people is, for better or for worse, people love to be seen as like savvy in business making and decision making. And so sometimes just slowing it down to say like, this is not a good deal, you know. And this, again, I know, like I speak sometimes from a different, like the location is different. So the politics within your sector, this may not track like one-to-one, but oftentimes you have to go to the psychological problem of people not wanting to look conservative, anti-innovation, not here for progress. Like you would be shocked how many times you think you're having like a rational conversation and then you're like, oh wait, no, it's not even that. This is like a high school cool conversation. Like this is even harder. This is even harder to engage with because it's like a social construct. So
and from that professional context.
Yeah. So I think sometimes just going at the thing, and it doesn't have to be a big assertion of confidence. It's to say, if we want to do this properly, we really should stop and, you know, rip the terms apart a bit more and just make sure that this is serving us. And I know this is very specific to procurement, but you can think about a lot of procedural things where if you just add a bit in between where people aren't expecting it, you can reorder some of the power. Because I will tell you, the worst thing to do is be predictable all the time in power dynamics. And it's like, even the government, if like, I would say even up to the national level, it's like, okay, we're going to do this. These people are going to get mad. We're going to say this, you know, like it goes back and forth in these ways where it's like all so easy to choreograph. So I think just it like, and also know that you're sometimes going to be wrong. You're going to make mistakes. Like, I think that's why it's really critical to have like, and this is why I feel for all of us, is that we live in a precarious, like it's a very precarious culture where you feel scared to be the one making the mistake, or it's transactional. Like, oh, the last time you brought this up, it actually was a really bad idea, so now I don't want to do it again. You know, like these things are hard. So I continually think building solidarity with people to take turns on being the one slowing things down, or to take turns on throwing out the like unpopular idea. Because I'll just end by saying, it's for sure, if you work in deep relationship, that's where you get trust, right? And it is so inefficient. And you have to, I say this all the time to people, look, I don't like that this made me feel bad, but it did. So like, I kind of need you to come along with me on where this went wrong, you know. And there's, I think, a lot of ways is if you can just find the confidence to like own the uncomfortable thing a bit, it can help other people come and be vulnerable together. And then from there you can keep building. But the pretending stuff, I think, is really a significant problem, because how much are we performing and how much are we actually contending with reality? Like, it's getting, the tax is very high to contend with words not meaning what they're supposed to mean.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and Alicia did say, this is so real. Thank you for the answer.
Great.
And it for sure applies to internal procedures too, she says. So, yeah. I think, okay, we've got another one here.
And I've got one, just a quick point to mention, because accessibility and access from a disability perspective is something everyone has to be thinking about. That is a really good, positive way to bring in, because you know what it feels like to be the compliance person, like, oh, here, like no one even wants to be on the receiving end of people begrudgingly doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like trying to reorient some of the things that we already know we have to do into like a beneficial, like, this is great, like, let's all spend more time here. And I know, you know, like, we have to be here anyway, we're going to live with the consequence of the decision. So that construct is helpful for that as well. I'm just saying that as someone who's practicing it more and more.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. We had a very long question from Dan in the Q&A, and he said, you can skip my long-winded post. We shan't skip it, but maybe, Bianca, if you have a few minutes after, if you wouldn't mind replying to that in the Q&A feature. I see one more sort of short question here in the chat from Catherine. Bianca, are you familiar with Margaret Wheatley's Finding Our Way, Leadership in Uncertain Times? Her philosophy is akin to yours. Thank you for an amazing keynote.
Oh, wonderful. The name sounds familiar, but I don't trust myself. So I'm going to say no, and I'm going to definitely look it up for sure. So thank you so much for that and for the kind words.
Okay. Yeah, there's lots of appreciation and comments in the chat. So definitely take a moment to have a look at those if you can. Sabina says we could create a recommended reading list from this session. We absolutely should. So many recommendations.
Great.
maybe put together a list. Scholars Portal Day reads.
and I would really say, I know, right at time, if there's things that really bugged you or were wrong or were off, or you want to roast this, please share them. Like, I would love to receive that however I get through, but because we do have to practice and know, like, where do we need to tighten up, or where is it helpful to be specific. So please, both anything that didn't land, I'd love to know. If you have any time to share that with me, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Okay, we have, so there are, I think, 4 questions in the Q&A. If you have a few moments and you wouldn't mind just sort of taking a look and responding to those with the type answer feature, that would be great. Thank you so much for this talk. This was wonderful. I feel like I'm just having a moment of like, this was so fantastic, and
Thank you.
I enjoyed it a lot. I can see that so many other people did as well. So thank you so much for joining us and for that fantastic presentation. You're absolutely welcome to join us for the rest of the event if you would like, but absolutely no pressure. Yeah, thank you so much. So if you could all just give a thank you to Bianca in the chat, that would be great. And then with that, we're going to go into a short break. We're going to take a 5-minute break and come back at 1:50, and then we'll move ahead with some lightning talks. So
beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. And I'm going to pass it over to Rivit now to introduce these lightning talks, and she will be the moderator this part. Go ahead, Rivit.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have 3 lightning talks. We're gonna have all the talks in a row and then keep some time for questions. So I would like to introduce our first talk, which is Rescoping the ACE Service Call. And our speakers are Lisl Schoner-Saunders, academic librarians from Algoma University, and Lauren Rupert, virtual reference and accessibility specialist from Ontario College Library Service. So over to you, Lisl and Lauren.
Thanks, Rupert. I'm going to see if I can share my screen for our slides. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Rupert. My name is Lisl, and today Lauren and I are talking a little bit about some of the work we've done with ACE and kind of rescoping our service calls. Oh, sorry. Get on the right screen. Okay, just as a heads up for anyone with visual impairments, I've added a few images that are not quite relevant to the slide, but are kind of fun and related, and I'll try to remember to give descriptions as well as I go. So when we joined, when this kind of work started, it's kind of important to acknowledge where we were. So COVID had a really big impact on the ACE service. Because of lockdowns, there were scanning challenges, specifically at Internet Archive. There was also a lot of staff turnaround, which led to a lot of disengagement and less representatives coming to the calls. So there was a huge impact on the calls. There was kind of less engagement, and because of that, it was having the calls became quite stale. If anyone who was on the calls before can probably attest to. There was also in 2023, 2024, an ACE report, assessment report that came up with some questions and recommendations for the service. And so with that report was, how do we implement those changes with the current model? Which kind of led to where we are now, which was Lauren and I stepping up as co-chairs. So we decided one from OCUL and one from OCLS, or the colleges. And yeah, so then Rupert, Lauren and I have been working really hard since, I want to say December, to make some changes on the ACE service. And so that's kind of where we're at right now and where we're going.
So before anything else, though, we needed to get organized to take on the work ahead. And to do this, we migrated our existing work to a new wiki space and archived our old ACE community call content. This allowed us to create a space that would meet the new goals of the group. And the next step was to migrate the ACE community call listserv from the University of Waterloo to the University of Toronto. And finally, we spent some time updating contacts, getting in touch with those representatives who would need to be on the call to ensure that individuals had access to the new wiki space, were included in the listservs, and received invitations to our monthly calls.
The other piece we really wanted to work on was engagement. The calls had become very much a report on the current state, and it was mostly Rupert talking, and then it was no response. So that was a big piece that we wanted to kind of fix. So the first one we did, we started with a community survey of the group. So we wanted to kind of assess how were the timing of the meetings going, what was the platform, how often did you want to meet? And so we wanted that feedback directly from our community to kind of bring into those calls. We also started doing, and this I cannot take credit for, this was from another group that I stole it. I won't name them, but they know who they are. And you can see an example on my slide right now with my sloths. So we started doing meme check-ins as a quick and easy way to just say, okay, how is everyone doing today? But it was just a fun way to kind of break the ice and get people to engage and just kind of figure out, we were talking about calls with 30+ people. So it was a quick, easy way for people to throw a number in the chat and be like, I choose this one because it's the closest one to half the fleet. Like it was a great way to start our meetings, and it did seem to have a good impact on breaking the ice a little bit and getting some conversations going. We also decided to take attendance, which was new, but we decided to, instead of taking it by individual level, we took it institutionally, because our main concern was to make sure that there was a representative from each college and university present on the call, and not necessarily how many and who. And so that we started taking that, and with that, and kind of what Lauren was just saying, we were able to use that information too to also send intentional communications where we could kind of reach out to those institutions who were not able to come to the call and be like, hey, what's going on? Do we have the right contact? Are you on this listserv? Are you getting this information? And kind of figure out what was happening at those institutions as well to make sure that everyone was engaged in getting the information that they needed.
And then while we were re-engaging the ACE community, one of our priorities was to strengthen the involvement of the ACE college representative community. And this meant confirming contacts, once again, at the participating institutions and increasing communication channels. So that last step, communication, included adding college representatives to that new ACE listserv, the updated one, but also to circulate news again on a college-specific list as well. And then, of course, ensuring everybody had access to that ACE Spot Docs space. But it all paid off, because now we have an all-time high of the college representatives attending our community calls. And in addition to that, we have several members enthusiastically participating in our working group and in our steering committee.
So then this is when the real work began. So that was all the fun stuff. And then we had to completely redo. I actually don't even know if there was a current terms of reference before we started. No, I don't think there was. So we had to create a terms of reference for the group, which was a lot of work. It took multiple calls, and I'm really thankful to our community for all of the work they contributed to those, because it was a lot of work. But it was really important because it provided a good scope for the ACE service calls and the group as a whole, which was really missing before. And it also placed these calls within the larger OCUL structure. So we now had a reporting structure to make changes and suggestions, but also the opposite as well, to receive feedback and about the service. And this was very unclear before, and we were, before this work kind of started, there was questions of, is this group necessary? Should this work continue? Like, are these calls actually contributing to anything? So with this terms of reference in place, it kind of really reaffirms that yes, this group is necessary and we are doing important work. So that was awesome. And as Lauren just mentioned, it did lead this, from the terms of reference, it led to actually the creation of two groups, one subcommittee and one working group, from the suggestions and the conversations that came out. So that was amazing. Our first subcommittee and our first working group. And we were very, very thankful for all of the volunteers. There was a surprising number of volunteers for both groups, and from both colleges and universities. So it was amazing. And it kind of led us to identifying a number of issues and strategic focuses for the group going forward. So we have lots of work ahead of us, which is always a good thing.
And speaking of the work ahead of us, of course, the work is ongoing, and the ACE community thrives on collaboration. We would love to hear from you. So our community calls are designed to be a space to share, consult, and collaborate. We work together to overcome challenges related to the service, to make the most of new opportunities and developments, and to continue to improve the service for our users. So if you would like to collaborate with the community, please consider attending one or more of our monthly calls.
And then just a last thank you again to all of the work of our ACE service call committee group members. You have made a huge contribution, and we appreciate all of your work that you have done for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. And of course, thank you to all of you for your time and attention today. We have included our contacts here, Lisl and myself, if you would like to reach out for more information. And we also have the ACE list included near the bottom.
Thank you so much, Lisl and Lauren. And we'll have maybe questions at the end of this session. So I will take us now to the next talk, which is Sustainable Accessibility, Developing Expertise in Remediation for Alternate Formats. And our speaker today is Carli Agostino, Access Service Librarian from Carleton University. So take it away, Carli.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. I'll get started. So I'm here today to talk a bit about how the alternate format services at Carleton has grown. So like most, if not all, OCUL schools, the Carleton Carleton's alternate format service provides students, staff with access to alternate formats of textbooks and research materials. We use the ACE service among many other repositories to source materials, and we also do very minimally do some in-house scanning. Only when we have no other options. So the slide shows a bar graph that shows a slight upward trend of our requests from winter 2022 to summer 2024, with summer 2023 being the lowest, with below 50 requests, and the highest being in winter 2024 with just under 200. So in the past, our service exclusively provided unremediated content of alternate formats. So these files have only been optical character recognized or OCR'd and not reviewed for errors. They haven't had logical reading order or tagging applied to them. And these are mainly used by sighted students that are using text-to-speech software. At this time, we were a team of one person and did not have the capacity or the training for creating remediated readings. At the time, the readings for visually impaired students were being created by one staff member in our disability services office, which is called the Paul Menton Center at Carleton. And this staff member was reviewing word for word, the OCR of the text, tagging and adding logical reading order, as well as adding alternative text. The staff member was, of course, providing a very, very essential service, but accessibility always needs to be a community effort. And when we were thinking about, wanting to build a more sustainable service and create a more accessible learning environment, we collectively decided to bring this work over into the library, also to create a more seamless experience for patrons who at that time were kind of getting bumped between our service and the disability services office. So with that in mind, our library executive supported building a more robust library accessibility team, and subsequently for the team to be trained on remediating documents for the visually impaired. So we were able to add 2 full-time positions to our team, bringing us up to a total of 3, 4 if you include myself. However, it's really the team that I've listed on the slide here that is doing all of the heavy lifting. So our staff were also supported in attending a number of conferences focused on accessibility in higher education, the Accessing Higher Ground conference in Denver, as well as the accessibility conference that was formerly hosted by the University of Guelph. We were able to attend hands-on workshops to build the skills to be able to remediate documents. We also had in-house training by Gina Catanazzo, who is a digital accessibility expert, and she trained a number of staff. So really, there was a concerted effort to build our capacity. So as of fall 2024, we brought this service over to the library, and I think we've had a very successful first year of providing this service. So this graph has the previous data in green, but it also now includes the readings that we have remediated in blue. So remediating readings, as many people know, takes a significant amount of time and extra effort, and we capped out winter 2025 with just under 900 requests in total. So pretty massive growth from the less than 200 requests we had the previous winter. Over our first academic year, we provided these services to 7 visually impaired students as well as instructors. Over 1,000 books, chapter articles, and other documents were individually remediated, as well as close to 200 textbooks and monographs. So with the clear growth of our service, we started to explore how we could use AI tools to support us in the process, specifically in writing alternative text. As most people know, writing alt text can be really challenging, especially when you're not a subject matter expert, and also when you need to write alt text for hundreds, if not thousands, of images. So the slide shows a table where I've kind of drawn some conclusions at this point. So there's alt text generators such as alt text AI, Unia, Tailwind, and these are tools that have been designed with alternative text best practices and visual processing in mind. So they have a high accuracy rate for correctly describing the image, but they are not able to process the accompanying text with the image in order to understand the context. And so they also only allow you to upload one JPEG file or PNG at a time. And for alternate formats, we're working with Word documents or PDF versions of textbooks that have images nested within them that are hundreds of pages long. So uploading a file at a time is really not a sustainable solution for us. So there are also tools like ChatGPT and Copilot, which do allow you to upload a Word file or a PDF file with text and images, and they are good at processing that text and adding content or adding context, but they are very much less successful at visually interpreting the content and will often hallucinate the images. So like our keynote already said, an efficiency can be good, but it also can be problematic. And in this case, AI can help us, but it's really not the full solution. And we still very much need human review when using these tools. So Lisl and Lauren mentioned this, the ACE service assessment report. Some of the recommendations that came out of that align with some of the work we did at Carleton, including adding remediation to the workflows, giving staff more ability to upload and edit content, as well as adopting metadata standards for remediated content, looking at consortial licensing options for the software that we use, and of course, exploring the ways that remediation can be supported with AI and automation. But really, there's a lot of expertise across OCUL and Scholars Portal. There's lots of schools who are already doing this work. And I think, this report really just highlights that there's a collaborative way forward in enhancing the service. So to wrap up with some next steps, the ACE committee has recently struck a strategic initiatives subcommittee, which Lisl and Lauren mentioned. And this is going to look at implementing some of those recommendations into ACE. Myself and Ellen Olsen-Lynch from Trent University are co-chairs of this subcommittee, and our goal is to really find ways that we can enhance the accessibility, usability, and sustainability of ACE. Along with the theme of reciprocity, Carleton is also working with folks at Scholars Portal to bulk upload many of the books that we've remediated into the repository so that other schools can utilize these. In terms of metadata, for now, we'll add a generic description once they're uploaded, but eventually with the forthcoming NISO accessibility standards, those will be applied eventually. And of course, I hope to continue to cautiously explore and consider how AI and automation can be integrated. And I'm really interested to see where the OCUL AIML project ends up moving forward. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carli. And our next talk is collaborative collecting, better together. And our speakers are Alicia Zorzetto, Head of Collection Services at Brock University Library, Christa Foley, Assistant Director, Information Resources and Collections at OCUL, and Janice Adlington, Head Collections and Content Strategy at McMaster University. And last but not least, we're gonna hear again from Lisl Schoner-Saunders, Academic Librarian at Algonquin University. So over to you guys.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, thanks everyone for the time today. I'm just gonna briefly go over just a basic introduction of CCWG. So just an introduction for the OCUL mission was to support, one of the main missions is to support innovative and collaborative efforts in collection development. With that in mind, CCWG was formed to recommend strategies and pilot projects for advancing collaborative collection development across OCUL. And the reason for that was acknowledging some of the benefits. Specifically, there's 4 that we typically view for collection development. One being to expand access to diverse scholarly resources, also minimizing costs, leveraging shared infrastructure, and then the 4th to leverage as well expertise across the consortium. Through this process, we did do an environmental scan, and we recognized some of the needs for project success would include flexibility and the ability to opt in to participation, while also respecting individual library priorities and the alignment with legal, financial, and institutional requirements. So the first recommendation, I would call this one of the low-hanging fruits, would be to have an additional second shared EBA. Evidence-based acquisition, or EBA, basically it's an initial access to a subset or an entire comprehensive collection of monographs through a publisher. And initially you'd pay for that access, and at the end, typically of a year, you would receive data to provide data based on usage to provide selection at the end of the period. We have one already with Wylie that started in 2023 and found that it was widely successful and led to cost savings and a very successful ability to strategically make decisions across OCUL for our selections. So we made a recommendation to have a second EBA. The next one is a more challenging but incredibly useful opportunity, which is ebook interlibrary loan. So ebook ILL is consistently being viewed as an essential component for collaborative collection development. Most of OCUL surveyed support a shared ebook interlibrary loan, 70%. This is happening across other consortia, but we do recognize that Scholars Portal provides a promising non-commercial avenue for this. So this second recommendation is to explore the legal and technical feasibility of enabling a full ebook ILL through Scholars Portal. And we do recognize that this is a more challenging. There could be difficulties in this process, so we do recognize the timeline being a little bit longer for 1 to 3 years.
So the next one that we looked at was examining the automated fulfillment network. So when the AFN was first launched, it meant an improved ability to share print, but also create that home borrowing experience for patrons with shared policies and a consistent loan expectations. And so with this, there's lots of information and data that we now have after, I think it's been about 2 or 3 years of this service. So there is a group already that is the Resource Sharing Analytics Working Group is already working on an analytics database that's looking at a lot of this data. And we as a group met with them to provide some collections feedback. So some of this work is actually already happening. Also, we in this work did a community survey, which kind of kept coming up back with concepts and of like proposing overlap analysis, looking at AFN circulation data, AFN analytics, looking at cross-institutional analytics as ways of informing collective collecting in the future. So we also learned that informally, a lot of schools are already actually using AFN data and holdings to determine their ongoing purchasing and weeding needs. So the recommendation for this became looking at an overlap analysis of AFN resources, but also assessing current AFN circulation and analytics data. And then hopefully this could lead to collective collecting strategies and policies, specifically around acquisitions and weeding within our different OCUL institutions. Next slide, thanks. Similar to this one, analytics, but this one is looking at a broader understanding of overlaps and gaps within our member libraries at OCUL, and specifically looking at what is commonly versus uniquely held at these institutions and what is being acquired and how are these resources being used. So this analysis of both print and electronic holdings of our OCUL holdings will help identify materials that be targeted for collective collecting and understanding the current level of duplication and number of copies needed within a collective model across these institutions. So a couple of collaborative future groups were identified that would be kind of well positioned to support this work. And the recommendation is to complete an analysis study with either using AIML analytics or other resource sharings to kind of inform this work. Thanks.
The next 2 recommendations move from analytics into considering content. We put together, sorry, I'm just looking at, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. We put together Indigenous and small press collections because many of the same challenges and considerations apply. These materials are time-consuming to identify and source, but may be exactly the types of materials we want to support local communities and to provide diversity in topics, cultures, and perspectives. These wouldn't be the areas where we'd buy only one copy from many institutions. We all want to support the TRC calls to action, our regional presses, and our local working authors. So the recommendation instead is to survey members on their strategies for selecting Indigenous and small presses, to identify current practices and collection overlap and fill gaps, and if possible, to share expertise to avoid duplicate effort. So we already have one example of sharing, which actually comes from Alicia. So earlier this spring, Alicia worked to identify small press titles available in Gobi as ebooks, and she contributed her list back to Gobi. At the beginning of last week, Gobi announced the new Canadian Small Presses Spotlight list with over 400 recent titles. So it's now very easy for those of us who use Gobi to select and add these works. This is a simple example, but there are more specialized areas, particularly with Indigenous language collections, where we could really benefit from shared expertise.
One more minute.
And shared pride, print. The sixth recommendation, shared print, may be what people first think of with collaborative collecting as mentioned. So many of our libraries are under budget pressure, don't want to buy books just in case. We're also repurposing collection space for user space. Some institutions are hoping to use savings to broaden the collective collection. And one member comment actually said this well: I would love to see a model where schools select some specialties for print collecting so that we are not all purchasing the same books. This would free up resources, time, funds to focus on key areas of strength at our own library. And this idea came up a number of times, that we should identify and build on our library's subject strengths and strategically add just enough copies across OCUL to satisfy demand. This is potentially a very large undertaking, and our group was careful to scope our recommendations to prospective collections, as there's already undertakings with Downsview and North Nord around legacy print. So we recommended instead piloting a small shared collection or area studies collection to test workflows while engaging in the larger analytics, data analysis, and developing a shared print strategy. So turning it over to Christa for the next steps.
Thank you, everyone. So these were the recommendations in the CCWG report that was presented to the directors. And these recommendations actually were not approved by the directors at this time. While there was a lot of support for the work being done and the work of this group, I think the directors needed a little bit more time and a little to kind of think this out some more. So we will be having a symposium or a colloquium that we're calling it. We're planning that, the executive committee is planning that with the details to be coming out later. We're probably thinking August, September are likely dates for an online symposium. It would be an invite kind of event. And so it just will give us some more time to formulate the OCUL plan. The work of the collective collecting group is complete now, but this will give us time to regroup and allow the directors an opportunity to give some more direction so that we can scope out their kind of ideas further for them. And that's everything from us. Any questions?
Thank you so much. So we had some questions in the QA from Aneta to Carli, and I see that Carli already replied the question. I wonder if, Aneta, this answered your question. The question was for everyone. Carli, can you speak to the copyright considerations when uploading the content to the AI next text generation? Carli, do you want maybe shortly to give us your...
So it's definitely not like we aren't using the tools to like we haven't necessarily implemented any of these AI tools, and that is absolutely right. You're not supposed to upload copyrighted materials into Copilot or into ChatGPT, and if you are, you should be following fair dealing guidelines. So it's more so just kind of an exploratory thing that we're doing to get a sense of, you know, what capacity the tools have. And I mean, I think my findings are that they're not really what we need anyways. But yes, either way, copyright is absolutely a consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we do need to move into the break now, just to keep us on time. So thank you, all of you, for your wonderful talks, and Ravit for moderating. I think there's one more question in there, but it looks like Janice is already typing away an answer. So I think.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
If anyone does have any other questions for those presentations, just pop them in the Q&A, and our speakers can address them there. We're going to move into another break. This one's 15 minutes, but it also includes our spring slideshow. So we're going to take about a 5-minute break. We'll come back to start that slideshow at 2:27, but we won't resume full programming with the OCUL update next until 2:35. So if you would like a bit of a longer break, you have until 2:35. If you would like to see the slides of spring, come back for 2:27, and we will start that then. So welcome back. Hopefully everyone who would like to see the slides of spring is back here with us now. So we're going to get started with that. Just going to pull up my slides. Okay, can everyone see the slides of spring?
Look good.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. All right. So last year we started a second slideshow to accompany the annual pet parade, the beloved pet parade, and we had Scholars Portal Days a little bit earlier last year at the beginning of May, and so we thought maybe as an idea to try and bring people together as we're gathering from all across the country, to sort of ground us and tie us to our communities, our neighborhoods, our hometowns, and things like that. That it would be nice to see and share with everyone what spring looks like for us at home. So we're a little bit later this year having the event, but it is, I mean, it's been a little cold recently, so I don't know if we're fully in spring yet. So we decided to do that again this year. So here are some springtime sites from across Ontario and beyond. So first up, we have from Katrina from OCUL. We have some scenes from the local farmers market and community garden. This beautiful large bundle of fresh rhubarb for sale at the farmers market, $5 a bundle. It looks delightful. And then on the right, the community garden beds all ready for planting on a bright sunny day. And that grass looks so green, and the yellow dandelions, it just looks like a gorgeous sunny morning. And I would love to be at that farmer's market. Some more springtime sites, a little bit of a different tone to some of these ones. In Waterloo, spring means the blooming of the beautiful magnolia trees, as you can see on the bottom here. But it also means the arrival of the geese. And I am from Waterloo, so I know about the geese. So the top picture is a wonderful, I don't know if we'd call it a collage, maybe, some form of artwork that Allison from Waterloo has made, featuring her and her cat Kermit, and as they prepare for the geese. So this is the two sides of spring, I suppose, in Waterloo area. And here from Jacqueline from Scholars Portal, we have a rainbow of tulips and a growing evergreen. We have, Jacqueline says, we have a Colorado spruce outside our window, and learning the seasonality of an evergreen tree has been very fun. Right now it's growing baby pine cones, and she said there is so much sap. Which I also grew up with an evergreen, and I do remember making like sap soup. So apologies for what I imagine is just sap everywhere, but a beautiful tree you have, Jacqueline. We have this photo of these lovely daffodils from Catherine Davidson, rooted in land long cared for by Indigenous peoples. 2 daffodils clothed in vibrant yellow and green. They remind us to listen, to learn, and to walk gently on the earth in a good way. These photos are from Annika from OCUL, and we have two photos of a bird's nest. A little robin family is nesting at their back door and is growing very quickly. So the first photo includes, it's a photo of 2 bright blue robin eggs in the nest. And the second photo, the nest is full of new hatchlings, and you can sort of see perhaps a shrieking little beak popping up here. Is lots of fluff in that nest. Very sweet. This is perhaps one of my favorite submissions to the Slides of Spring this year from Amy. There's a lot of questions. This one's really a conversation starter, so would love to hear some thoughts and ideas in the chat about what exactly we think is going on here. But the cherry blossoms arrived again this year at Robarts. They are sadly gone now, but they were very beautiful while they were here. But they did come with some unusual sights. Amidst the cherry blossoms outside Robarts Library, we have a figure standing on sort of a raised stone wall, wearing a red and white robe of some kind, a yellow helmet, it looks like, a black cape, and some kind of sword. So many questions for this one, and yes, ideas are welcome in the chat. This photo is from Bart, Scholars Portal. He says, the first sign of spring on my street is when the parkette turns into a lake and sometimes even ducks appear. And the photo shows an enormous puddle, though calling it a puddle seems like a loose grasp of the word. It seems generous. It's absolutely flooding a neighborhood park, but it's very beautiful. You can see the trees and some nearby houses reflected in the water's surface. And it seems like a bright, but a little bit of a foggy day, maybe. This one we have Wing the Labubu enjoys the cherry blossoms. So the photo shows Wing, who's an elvish style Labubu doll. I'm new to the Labubu doll, so I was very intrigued by this one. He's wearing brown overalls, has purple hair, fur, some pointy ears, and a very mischievous smile. And Wing is posing up on a tree branch with some beautiful pale pink cherry blossoms. And this is from Janice at TMU. This one is from me, and for me, neighborhoods, blooms, and gardens on my morning commute to work and evening walks are my favorite sign of spring. So the photo on the left, the first one shows some bright pink crabapple blossoms draped over a tree branch on a sunny evening, and the second photo shows the very first lilacs of the season that I came across on a very rainy walk a couple of weeks ago. We have this one from Lynn Service at McMaster, Friday night flag football in the Hammer. This feels like this is nostalgic to me almost, like the football pitch game at sunset, you know, the bright green field, the beautiful orange like sunset coming through the clouds. I feel like I can feel the sort of slightly cool but getting warmer summer evening. Yeah, very, very nice. And then as a little departure from nature sites, we have this lovely coveted lemon meringue lambs from a bakery in Little Italy from Julia at Scholars Portal, which seems to be a sort of sponge cake treat filled with lemon curd, I imagine, and then covered in meringue that is sort of swirled and torched and decorated to look like a very cute little lamb. And that looks delicious. And then our final submission is from Sabina at Scholars Portal, and she says, May showers and May flowers. And so despite a rainy and cold spell last week, and a little bit continuing into this week, these daffodils and pink tulips are blooming in gardens all around Toronto. And those are our signs of spring for this year. Thank you. All right. Grab my other slides here. And actually, rather than sharing a slide for approximately 3 seconds, I'm going to pass it directly over to Amy, who is going to give us an update from the OCUL office. So go ahead, Amy.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for sharing my slightly strange photo.
I'm so intrigued by it. I keep thinking about it. I haven't quite forgotten.
I'm intrigued, but all I could think about was how everyone else's pictures were so pretty. And mine was just sort of like a weird, blurry shot through my window. Anyway, hope people enjoyed. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to my Scholars Portal colleagues for making time during SP Days for an OCUL update. It's great to see so many people here today. I see 223 participants, which is awesome. My name is Amy Greenberg. I am the Executive Director of OCUL, the Ontario Council of University Libraries, and I will be providing you with a whirlwind update on just some of the good work that has been happening over the past year in the OCUL office and with our different governance groups. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards in the Q&A because I don't think there's going to be a ton of time. There's just sort of a lot of content that I wanted to make sure that I could share with you all. So I'm going to touch on some highlights for collaborative futures in Omni, communication and member engagement, governance, information resources, and our Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So to begin, collaborative futures in Omni. We, as usual, continue to build the amazing network of both software and, more importantly, people that we have. Some of the work that has been happening, guided by Annika and Alex in the OCUL office, includes planning for the Next Discovery Experience, or NDE, implementation in 2026. This is what Ex Libris is calling their new Omni user interface. It's both a user interface and an analytics module that will be rolled out in unison across all Omni partner libraries. We anticipate that will be in July of 2026, but a lot of it depends on timing on the vendor side, so still TBD. And the transition to this new interface will be led by our various collaborative future subcommittees and OCUL office staff as well. In addition, we continue to expand work in the network zone. There was a working group that did a ton of work over the past year, the Network Zone Electronic Resources Management, or NZERM working group, and they came up with some really great recommendations for how to continue and even expand the work that's happening right now in terms of collective licenses and also management and activation of e-resources for consortial collections. So there will be further details about how this work is going to be rolled out coming in the next little while. As well as always, there is continued opportunity for knowledge sharing and consultation. There were a few new email lists that got created this year to help bring together folks working in similar areas across our OCUL and Omni schools. There are drop-in calls on a wide variety of topics, with many of those recordings available on Spot Docs. And of course, we continue to have great participation in our working groups and subcommittees. I'm going to highlight a little bit of that work on the next slide. But I just wanted to also note that if you would like to see the sort of full range of what was going on across Omni and Collaborative Futures, there is a year in review page on Spot Docs and an annual report that was provided by the Collaborative Futures Steering Committee that goes into a lot more detail. So I encourage you to check that out. In terms of the subcommittees and working groups, again, these are just highlights, but I would like to just sort of let folks know that members of our accessibility subcommittee, as well as the CF operations team, which consists of myself, Annika, and Alex in the OCUL office, and 3 directors from our OCUL members, have been holding ongoing meetings with Clarivate, which is Ex Libris's parent company, to talk about their accessibility work and how that is rolled into their development, and when and where in the process they consult, and just trying to find opportunities perhaps for OCUL to get a bit more involved in those conversations and in the development work itself. So we've had 2 meetings so far, and that relationship and those conversations continue to be held. Of note, over the past year was the launch of the Onboarding and Training Working Group. Those of you who are involved in CF and Omni may have already spoken to these fine people. They have been doing a lot of consultation to understand the needs across our consortium They've been talking to many other of our subcommittees and working groups and folks at the schools, and they are developing lots of documentation and coming up with potential training plans. So stay tuned for more work there as well. Third bullet point there on the slide, I made an error. It is not the shared analytics working group. It is the resource sharing analytics working group. So my apologies for that mistake. But that group, as noted on the slide there, have been putting together several dashboards, and this relates to some of the analytics work that the collective collecting group mentioned. So that is how some of that information is being conveyed, and folks are getting data about collections and about resource sharing through those analytics and through those dashboards. So thank you to that working group for that kind of work. In addition, our CF Ducks and CF accessibility working groups, some of you may have seen this already, did some testing and evaluation on the Primo Research Assistant, which is currently optional, a large language model AI tool that is currently available in Omni. On the Primo side, the current recommendation after the group finished their rounds of testing was for OCUL not to implement, but to continue monitoring, as this seems to be an area where Ex Libris is doing a lot of development and things are rapidly changing. And I would be remiss if I didn't end by just reminding folks that we have the CF annual mini conference happening on July 8th, and registration is now open. Okay, moving on to communication and member engagement. OCUL launched a new website in November 2024. Encourage you to all take a look there. This was about making things more accessible and also more organized, easier to find information about our consortium. And so we hope you find it so, and that you've been able to check it out. You may recognize the color scheme from my slides is meant to reflect so the updated color scheme that we have there as well. Many thanks to the OCUL office staff who worked on that, and in particular on the SP side, Bart Kawala for his work there as well. We also were able to recognize some of our folks in our member institutions. At the beginning of this year, Matt Van Ast was recognized for his contributions to the Collaborative Futures vision and his contributions to the Automated Fulfillment Network in particular, with the 2024 OCUL Outstanding Contribution Award. We have 3 2025 visiting researchers this year: Heather McMullen from Queen's University, Joelle Rivard from Carleton University, and Dan Scott from Laurentian University. Heather has already started her term, and Joelle and Dan are coming on board in the summer. So we're really excited to work with them in their different areas of expertise. Lastly, I just wanted to mention, this was work that happened in the OCUL office earlier this year. We put together, after some surveying, we put together very customized, very local kind of value of sharing reports that were distributed to directors, laying out sort of the different areas of value that they are getting from being a part of the OCUL consortium. And these documents were intended to help them in conversations with their local institutional leadership, and we hope that they found them useful. All right, moving on to other areas of governance. Some of you may know the new OCUL governance cycle begins June 1st, and so this is the time when folks cycle on and cycle off of different committees and working groups, and we will have an announcement coming out very soon, noting all of those who are new members of the committees. But in the meantime, I just wanted to especially recognize our incoming committee chairs. So we have Mark Robertson from TMU, who will be the OCUL chair and chair of the executive, Nicole Nolan at Brock, who will be chairing the Collaborative Futures Steering Committee, the CFSC, Scott Gillies at Wilfrid Laurier, who will be chairing the Financial Management Advisory Committee, Casey Hoovey at McMaster, who will be chairing the Information Resources Committee, and Talia Chung at Ottawa, who will be chairing the Scholars Portal Operations and Development Committee, otherwise known as SPOD. OCUL does have several communities of practice and communities of interest. Again, this is just a highlight. You can find more detail about activities and updates from lots of other communities in the report on Spot Docs linked on the slide. It is also to be found in the Council Digest that was recently circulated. So A couple of highlights from our communities. The data community was a successful applicant for new initiatives funding for work to put public opinion polls from Global Affairs Canada into Borealis, so expanding the sort of range of national data that's available in that platform. The accessibility community has organized an accessibility symposium coming up very soon, June 17th to 19th, and I encourage folks to register and attend that if you have not already. And also, the IT community was formally dissolved. Many of you probably don't realize we had an IT community. And in fact, they have not been terribly active for the last little while, which contributed to their recommendation that they be dissolved. This was based on recommendations from the community moderator and a lot of consideration. And I add it to the slide because I think it's important to note that the idea behind OCUL communities is occasionally they do form in relation to or in response rather to a particular need or a pressing topic. And it is expected then that they would dissolve when that need no longer has to be addressed, or perhaps a community isn't the right way to to have those conversations. So it's just part of the life cycle of a community, and we do have processes in place for dissolving communities as well as for forming communities. So it's not necessarily expected that they will be perpetual. Last but certainly not least, on the governance side, OCUL has a new strategic plan from 2025 to 2029. This plan will be distributed very soon. We are aiming for early June, probably not next week, maybe the week after that, we will see, but June nonetheless. So I really look forward to everyone being able to see it. Because it is a new strategic plan and because it has been a while since we had a robust strategic planning process, the first year of this plan will involve a lot of refreshed planning and reporting. We really do want to be able to implement a structure where folks can we can have sort of an annual look at how well we are reaching our goals for the strategic plan and assess our progress. And I just want to note that out of those strategic planning conversations came a new OCUL core principle. So we have a new core principle. This is now live on the website with our other core principles. And this principle is around advancing reconciliation with Indigenous communities. I encourage you all to read it and reflect. The idea behind the core principles is that they are foundational and underlie everything that we do. And so we certainly thought that it was appropriate to add advancing reconciliation to our other core principles. And I'm very happy that this came out of our conversations around strategic planning. All right, moving along to information resources. The OCUL IR committee has accomplished a great deal of work over the past year. I'm going to go in flip order from what's on the slide here, but we heard earlier from members of the Collective Collecting Working Group. I want to thank them for all their work. I would like to echo Christa's statement at the end that the projects that were proposed, rather, were really, really highly valued by the directors. And in fact, they wanted to take those proposals and scope them a bit more. And Christa mentioned the fact that we are working on some kind of symposium, colloquium. And I think really the question that we all need to answer, and the one that the directors want us to answer, is how do we develop a common vision? So what's that common understanding? What's the work we need to do towards our collaborative futures vision of a province-wide library collection? What does it mean? How do we work towards it? And we hope to be answering some of those questions in the next few months, and then be able to work on those projects. But OCUL IR also had a really active and really productive open access working group. This group came up with a framework to guide evaluation of consortial open access offers, and they also developed a statement on open access principles, which was approved by directors and will be available soon on the OCUL website. So I encourage you all to take a look about that. And I would like to really thank both of those working groups for their hard work and dedication. It's really much appreciated. OCUL is an organization that really works a lot by committee. As slow and painstaking as that process may be, it is how we get a lot of really good work done, I think. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't mention some of the work happening on information resources and collections in the OCUL office by Christa, Foley, and Adita Alwi. They provide lots of really key services on behalf of our members. Again, these are just some highlights. We are still transitioning to our new consortium manager platform. We continue to review a lot of new AI terms and licenses. AI is, of course, the new thing. All the vendors want to put it in their products and add new terms. And so there's a lot of consultation that happens with this, the working group, subcommittee rather, of OCUL IR that deals with licensing and local load. A lot of conversations and consultations happening with that group before those AI terms are agreed to or not agreed to. There were a few new consortial products and new year-end offers. And I'd just like to say it's not, the only reason that we do consortial licensing, but there is certainly a financial savings component to it. And we conservatively estimate that this past year, doing things consortially saved member libraries approximately $9.3 million. Last but not least, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee of OCUL. This committee is working on two projects. One is an inventory survey. This was distributed to member library directors earlier in the year. The purpose of this was to gather information about our libraries in relation to their support for Indigenous students and staff, whether that's through programming and research, community relationships, collections development or collections, dedicated space, any documentation, policies, that kind of thing, and professional development. Analysis of the survey results is ongoing, and we will be working out a plan for sharing the results of that survey more widely across OCUL. In addition, the OCUL TR committee applied for and received new initiatives funding to launch a speaker series in 25-26, and we hope to be able to announce some speakers and dates in a little while. Conversations with speakers are in the works, and we just need to finalize everybody's schedule. Okay, well, I would be extremely remiss not to mention the amazing OCUL office team that really makes everything happen. So I hope you will all join me in thanking Adita, Noor, Annika, Alex, Christa, Katrina, Ellie, and Kari for all of their contributions to the work of OCUL. Kari Weaver is our new AI machine learning program manager. She started with us in April. She is on a secondment from University of Waterloo. I would like to officially welcome Kari in this forum, and you will be hearing from her very, very soon, together with Catherine Steeves, about the AIML program, which I'm sure you're all eager to hear updates about. Also, not pictured on the slide, but we've been working over the past 8 months with an amazing co-op student. His name is Michael Walker. He has been developing resource sharing functionality in Omni, and he has been great. I just don't have a picture of him, sadly. Okay, sorry about the whirlwind pace. That is all. Feel free to contact me at any time with questions. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions from the Q&A after I am finished talking.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy. I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet, but they might pop in now. So if you want to just keep an eye on that over the next few minutes, if there's any that come in. And following your wonderful introduction to Kari, I'm now going to pass it over to Kari and Catherine to talk about the AIML program.
All right. Thank you so much, Gabby. Let me...
Hello.
Sure.
Kari, do you want me to drive?
I can. It's perfectly
Okay.
fine.
That's
Let
good.
me just, there we go. All right. But if you would like to introduce yourself, Catherine.
Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Steeves, and I'm the program director for OCUL's AIML program, as Amy just mentioned.
And I am Kari Weaver. As Amy stated, I am the program manager since the beginning of April for the AIML program, and I am graciously on secondment from the University of Waterloo, who is helping support this work by making me available to OCUL. So let's see. So we have just a few minutes today, so we're just going to walk you through a quick overview of the AIML program and the projects associated with it. We will talk about 3 of the 5 projects at not length, but slight amount more depth and then talk about some things that will be forthcoming, as we are still very much at the beginning of this work. And really getting it moving forward. And then I think we will actually have a few minutes for questions. So Catherine, I will let you take it away to talk about sort of the history of the AIML program.
All right. And this part will be particularly brief. I know that there are likely people on the call who are new to OCUL and so may not have a sense of the history. The program was officially launched in 2024, just about a year ago. And it's the result of a AI and machine learning task force initiative from the following year. And at its essence, it's a program that's designed to support collaborative, responsible innovation through experimentation and capacity building with artificial intelligence throughout OCUL. And the other, I guess the one element that is could be considered unique to OCUL is that notion of collaborative, so that the task force really set to ask itself, what can we do as a consortium to help position Ontario's university libraries to respond to this emerging new technology? And so the outcome was, if you can move this slide forward, please, Kari, was a recommendation for 5 projects, as Kari mentioned. Government documents, which is a project I'll tell you a little bit more about, exploring the use of artificial intelligence in virtual reference, and Kari will touch upon that today, and a foundational program in capacity building. And that is an initiative Kari will go into more detail about, but it's one that we're really starting to get off the ground just now. The government documents program we've been working on for much of this year. So if you can advance the slide. So at the heart of it, this project is about enhancing access to digital collections. And we were successful in an application for funding, but also to become a part of a Ontario AI consortium through the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. And the research problems we proposed and that we're exploring through this project is, how can we make the most of our digitized collection? So we all know mass digitization and our unique collections that we have been digitizing increases access, but it's not always easy to find that digital information. And so we are exploring how we can use artificial intelligence powered tools to improve the discoverability of unique digitized collections, and also asking the question, what new ways of engaging with this content could be made possible through these tools? So the collection we're using for this first experiment is a collection of government documents from the University of Toronto. It's an digitization project they've conducted through the Internet Archive. And the main aim of the project is to extract metadata from these historical government documents at scale, which will allow for increased discovery and access to this important digitized Canadian government document materials. And much of this work will be applicable and can be used to inform the future project on the ACE remediation project, so the accessible content e-portal. And so you can tune in tomorrow to learn more about this particular project from Jacqueline White-Appleby, and she'll be diving into this with some more details about the progress that they've made, some of the challenges, and so forth. So you can go ahead.
So with that, I will take over. So the next project is entitled Enhancing Virtual Reference, but this is an exploratory project that's being looked at in conversation with the vendor for the OCUL Ask Us or Ask Librarian chat service, 2 working groups have been formed to help this work progress and provide input, needed human input into the potential effectiveness and ultimate recommendation of this chatbot that is being developed by our vendor for this. We've also had the opportunity to have some conversations between the project leads for this project and other institutions who have implemented similar projects, helping us to think through how can we highlight some of the distinct aspects of our service currently, which includes the fact that it is staffed by human beings who are there to answer your questions, and how are other folks highlighting their human operators for their chat services in combination with chatbots. So that's what I can tell you about enhancing virtual reference at this point. You probably have somebody from your institution who is involved in one of the 2 working groups. So I would certainly encourage you to reach out to the chat lead at your institution. If you are involved in that service, they would know who it is, or it might be them, or you're certainly welcome to reach out to me if you have concerns. And the one that might be of most interest to folks is the capacity building program. So capacity building is really about supporting you and all of the individuals working across our many OCUL member institutions. As part of this, we are currently running a program survey because, as Catherine indicated, it's been about a year since the program was struck. And now when we're starting to move forward in earnest with a lot of this work. So we'd like to get a sense from you of where you are with AI and machine learning, what questions you have, what professional development you found helpful and supportive. And we are running the survey until tomorrow. So if this hasn't come across your channel or your email, or you haven't found a time to respond, there's a QR code here. I think we'll probably also throw a direct link in the chat. Maybe Gabby can do that, or Catherine. And we would be delighted for your response. We are not collecting personally identifiable information. I'm not even asking what institution you work at. So we're really just interested in your experience. And this will help inform programming and supports that we can offer through the capacity building program going forward. So we do have some programs forthcoming. We will be launching a reading club called Beyond the Algorithm, which focuses on the humanistic aspects of artificial intelligence and our engagement with it. That will be happening late summer. I think our first offering will be sort of late August, early September. In partnership with the Choice LibTech Insights blog, we will be launching a year-long, every other month tooltips blog series, which will focus on different groupings or classes of AI tools, their functionality, and some of the common tools that we see within the library context. So the first tooltips installment will focus on research assistance, which we've already heard about from Primo. Our first focus area for the Beyond the Algorithm Reading Club will be AI and human rights. And then we will be looking to launch some member-led and member-presented workshops starting in the fall and into the future. And additional professional development will be identified through analysis of that survey. So we certainly encourage you strongly to respond. So with that, that brings us to the end. I can stop sharing this. And I think we do have maybe a minute or two for questions.
You've got about 2 minutes for questions. So if there are any questions, please pop those into the Q&A, and we can take a look at those. Thank you both. I forgot the survey closes tomorrow, so I still need to fill that out. So thank you for the reminder for that. I will do that today for sure. And yes, Katrina has shared the link to that survey in the chat. So please do take a moment to fill that out. Some excitement for the reading club part of capacity building in the chat. That will be nice. Work our way through all those shared resources in the community of practice matter most that just seem to pile up that I mean to get to, and there's just always so much to read.
Well,
and I can
thank
just
you for
share.
your time.
Yeah, I was going to
if
say.
Anyone go for it.
Yeah, I can just say for the reading club, we will have a reading and we will be inviting in a guest expert on that topic where we will be recording a conversation. So you'll have an opportunity to engage with that material in different ways. If you are somebody who finds that your reading list piles up and you don't quite get to that.
Yeah, that's great. That structure sounds great for me. Yeah. We have one question that just came in the chat. I don't know, timing wise, would either of you or both of you maybe be able to take a look at that one and answer that through the typed answer option? That's from Sarah Jane. So yeah, if you don't mind sticking around for a few minutes and having a look at that and replying to that one there, that would be great. And yeah, if anyone else has any other questions for Catherine or Kari, please pop them in the Q&A.
The only thing I wanted to say that I didn't get a chance was just to tie this initiative to the keynote today, Bianca. This really, the whole intention of this is to have OCUL engage at a scale and scope that's very practical and pragmatic and really, activates our engagement with this new technology. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to now pass it over to Harpinder. I'm going to share my slide for 2 seconds just so that we can see our upcoming lightning talks here. And I'm going to let Harpinder introduce our final 2 lightning talks and speakers of the day.
Thank you, Gabby. To kick off this round of lightning talks, please welcome Cameron Wheaton and Zhang from McMaster University to present Enhancing User Access to Library Services and Resources, Insights from libkey Nomad++ module. The floor is yours, and Cameron.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
excellent.
We can hear.
Okay, we're just going to try to share the presentation here. Just let me know if you can see that all right. Share.
Don't see anything yet. Oh, there we go. Loading now.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries. No, it's all good. I think it's still loading. There we go. Now we got it.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, all. Thanks for joining today and having us here. My name is Cameron Wheaton, and I'm a collection strategy librarian for social sciences and humanities at McMaster University Libraries. And I'm also joined today by my colleague Zhang, who is our resources and collections analysis librarian. We're here to talk to you today about our experiences so far with the trial for an add-on module for Third Iron's product called libkey Nomad, and the module itself is called Nomad++, which is always a little bit clunky. For those that may not be familiar with libkey Nomad, it's a browser extension tool that users can download to help provide quick, direct linking to journal articles and ebooks that are available through their respective libraries. It's a really useful tool for helping connect users with library resources, particularly in situations where they opt not to use the library website or, say, Omni to search for the resources they're trying to access. To provide some little bit of a timeline as to how the experience has gone so far with Third Iron at McMaster. We look back to May 2024, where we started our trial for Third Iron Complete. During that trial, we happened to have access to the Nomad++ module, and we simply were testing it out with our own staff on the back end in a instance of Omni that wasn't available to the public during that time. So we trialed that for the summer and ran through a number of different demos and other sort of experiences, and we, by September 2024, elected to subscribe to Third Iron Complete through OCUL. Now, the drawback here, or the challenge, was that this offer does not include the Nomad++ module as part of it. So once we were going through the trialing the aspects of this, we kind of lost those features as part of it. So part of our hopes and plans for implementation of these tools is includes key features that are a part of Nomad++. So we had a discussion with representatives from Third Iron, and they provided us with the ability to access the tool starting back in March of this year, and we'll have access to it to trial through to the end of August, when there will be a renewal and some decisions have to be made at that time. So what exactly does Nomad++ add-on module include that we're so eager to explore? It includes customized branding that can provide institutional images and color schemes that may make the tool more identifiable for users in these circumstances. Nomad++ also offers domain messaging that can draw greater attention to various library services or other news that needs to be shared with the user in those particular situations. The module also has the ability to integrate several different library online chat programs with the browser extension, including the platform that Scholars Portal's Ask a Librarian virtual reference service is hosted on. Lastly, Nomad++ provides citation export features for most citation management software options, but we're not really focusing on that as part of the talk today. At this point, though, I'm going to pass over things to Wei, who will be providing more details and context for how exactly we tested out these features and what can be realized as part of it at McMaster. So go ahead, Wei.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. So I'm here to provide the experiments that we have done so far and provide some visuals to let folks see what this Nomad++ tool can actually do for us. So first, as Cameron mentioned, the custom branding is the first thing we look at. On the left column here, you can see the default libkey settings. If you're a subscriber, you might be very familiar with the flames. The green flames are cute, but they don't mean too much for our library users. So on the right, we have made these custom branding with our logo, with the McMaster colors, so that, you know, whenever our users are on the web, they know that they are always connected to the library and library service is available to them on the web. And next page, please. Yeah, there are some customized domain messages we have been experimenting with. So the first use case is facilitating access. So here is an example. If the user Google and go to The Economist, and customized message will pop up for them, letting them know we don't have a direct subscription, but we do have alternative access point. And clicking on the access button will bring the user back to our Omni for alternative access. And next slide, please. Another use case, we can promote our other library services through these messages. One example is our Covidence. So we have access, we have dedicated team support this tool. So whenever user, again, use Google, and whenever they went to covident.org, and they will see this message pop up saying we provide access, and we have a LibGuide to support users how to use this tool. So again, a customized link is there for access. And next slide, please. Another example we want to share with you is at this moment, McMaster is making every effort to promote our open access publishing agreements as well. So as an experiment, we have customized this message on our research ethic board, because that's where our researchers and authors may want to go in advance of their research. So again, highlighting our open access publishing agreements, highlighting our services supporting their publishing efforts, and also the link leads to our SciFree tool where researchers can search for OA journals where they can publish for free or at a reduced cost. And next slide. This is like another message that we think Nomad can help us promote. We talked a lot about AI today, and basically this is on everyone's mind. And McMaster do offer a few tools using generative AI technology, but security, privacy, all these issues can be neglected sometimes. So we have this message as an alert, letting user know the privacy issues, and we recommend that you check out the privacy policy before using such tools. And next slide, please. So I think the customized messaging is a great way to promote library services beyond collections. So if anyone has more innovative ideas of how we can make better use of this messaging tool, please let us know. We'd like to hear from you. And from my previous screens, maybe you have noticed the speech bubble as well. And this is what Cameron mentioned about the integration of the Ask a Librarian service from Scholars Portal. So we were able to integrate that into our Nomad instance. And if you click on that bubble, you will be led to this chat box, and you can any user can interact with the Ask a Librarian service. But there is something that needs improvement, because if you hover on that speech bubble, it currently displays Open Library Help. Library Help is the technology that powers this Ask a Librarian service, but our users don't necessarily know what it is. So we have made the suggestion, and Third Iron is working on that, hoping in the future we can see this can be customized to let users know what service this is. And the screenshot is our very exciting first interaction, successful interaction through this integration. And next slide. I think, yeah, that's
back
you,
to
Cameron.
Me. Thanks, Faye. So where do we go from here? The timing worked out well for us to be able to trial the Nomad++ module this summer, in large part because we haven't heavily promoted the tool yet to the wider McMaster community. So we don't expect these changes are going to heavily impact our users during this time period. But that being said, we are currently planning for a large promotional push in fall 2025 semester for Nomad. And that means that we have some challenges ahead of us when it comes to factoring in whether Nomad++ module is going to be there or not in these circumstances. Since there's no guarantee that Nomad++ is going to be a part of an offer consortially within OCUL, we aren't going to explore the potential applications of the module any further at this time, or any more than we already have, basically, because we obviously can't promote features for the resource that aren't available to the users, and it doesn't make sense to keep planning for more domain messaging to roll out or to promote the ability to connect to Ask a Librarian services. Also, consistent imagery is a key important aspect for promotion. So the custom buttons and chosen color schemes that Wade displayed before there may not be available when we roll this out. So we need to be able to prepare for the possibility that we will have to revert back to the standard imagery that comes with just the Nomad base option. With all that said, we welcome, as Wei has commented there, any other ideas you folks may have about how else these features can be used with Nomad++ to improve library services or communication. We also just wanted to use this as a time to try and gauge what the interest level around something like this is. I think it helps not to be in a silo around what what the interest level might be to have this available consortially. And we think this module provides some promising possibilities, but we know that there are some discussions and some negotiation that would need to be had before it comes up as an offer. So we thought it would be a good time now to be able to have that discussion and just put out there for you all to discuss and think about.
Yeah, that's an amazing project. Thank you both for introducing it to us. I see a lot of questions in Q&A, but due to time constraint, please take a moment to answer those in writing.
Absolutely.
Thank you again. So to continue this round of lightning talks, next, please welcome Tim Ribaric from Brock University to present creative uses of the Borealis API. Over to you, Tim.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for your attention. I realize I'm the last one on the agenda for today, so let's get to the fun stuff here. Okay. There we go. There's that. All the pieces in place. So as mentioned, my name is Tim Ribaric. I work at Brock University, and today I'm going to be talking to you about creative uses of the Borealis API and why that's important for us today and what else we can do. So today is not just going to be a show and tell of me talking about what I've done. I'm actually soliciting for collaboration here amongst you all. So APIs and Borealis. The great thing about Borealis is that it is built on top of a full function API. Right? So what this means, or at least what I am going to focus on for today, is that you can interact with it using stuff like Python to create custom curation or analysis tasks. So this is a story about how to do this or how I did this. What's our use case? So let's make sure all of the items in our Dataverse have a related publication field. Right, so Dataverse admins in the crowd will probably be familiar with this, but when someone submits a data set for validation or deposit into Dataverse, it's typically due to a publication that they're writing, and this is in support of that. However, a lot of times, that publication is not done, and it's still in its larval stage. So we get this situation after the data set has been published and after the article or book that requires that data set is published, you got to go back and make sure that the related publication is the metadata field is filled in with that information. So here's how I'm going to tackle this using this paradigm. So all of us here, hopefully, have an account on our instance of Borealis. If you jump up to the top corner of the page underneath your profile button, there'll be something for an API token. And very happy to go into this more in detail for those of you curious but unfamiliar with how this works. But effectively, anytime you want to introduce or interact with an API, what you can do is get a little string or a serial number from your user account, and that's the thing you use to authenticate yourself when you're going to use the API. And what comes next? Google Colab. So anyone here that has seen me speak before has seen me rock on this hobby horse quite a bit. I love Google Colab for all the interesting things it can do. And I'll just say it's something called a notebook platform, and it's run by Google. And the great thing is it puts computer code into a web page. So you don't need to do anything about hosting different tools or access to infrastructure. The Colab notebook does it all for you, which is great. So I have a notebook, I'll share a link with you in just a moment, that does this very checking for related publications workflow automatically. This is sort of a snippet of what it looks like. Effectively, you just paste in your API key that you generated using the platform, tell it, I guess, your instance name, and hit the Run All button. And what that will do is jump through a bunch of different pre-written chunks of code, and through the magic of API and post conversations between these web services, you can grab all of the items in your Dataverse and specifically looking at the related publication fields, right? So there's lots of metadata there. But if I want to sort of automate a workflow where I grab information from Borealis just to see what related pubs are missing or there, that's what this little notebook does. It's written in Python, as I mentioned. Or if you don't like sticking around in the Google Colab environment, you can export it as a CSV file and then do your analysis, your work with the items, changing metadata, et cetera, based on the CSV file that you can kick out of the platform itself. So what does this mean, Tim? Good question. You can make a notebook to do any sort of task with your Dataverse items. Well, another great question, such as, and I'll say, glad you asked. You can profile the content of your Dataverse for statistics or marketing purposes. So you could see what faculty or department is the most busy with depositing data sets, look at what's got the best download statistics, make a leaderboard, whatever you like. Another thing here too, metadata checking or something along those lines. I talked about related pubs, but I'm sure there are other more interesting metadata validation tasks you might want to attempt. And, you know, of course, practicing your Python too. Another thing that I love talking about is how great Python is. So now what? Thank you for asking. I would like you to contact me if you have an idea about what to do with this platform. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to find my chat box. It has disappeared for me. I'll find it in a second with a link to the notebook that I've already created that I've just shown you. Please, you know, fire up an API key, kick the tires on this, let your imagination float about what interesting things we could do or, you know, what you would like to see out of an interesting use of Borealis API, and then send me an email and let's talk about it. And with that, I know you're all wondering, and there's 13 exclamation points in this presentation. And I'll stop my share there to kick it over to questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim. Loved the exclamation counter.
I don't see any questions, but if any pops up, yeah, feel free to answer those things. Over to you, Gabby.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much. And yeah, if any questions for Tim, pop them in the Q&A, and he can hopefully answer them there. We're in our final 2 minutes, so if you don't get a chance to answer them in there, we are going to save the Q&A. So we will make sure to pass those along. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please pop them in there, and we will save that. It is 3:28, so I am not going to keep you too much longer. I have a couple of quick final updates to round out the day with. That concludes our programming for today. So thank you so much to all of our presenters, to all of our moderators, and to all of you for joining us. We really hope you will join us again tomorrow for day 2. A few quick wrap-up notes. We do have a feedback survey. It will also be shared tomorrow. So if you are planning to attend tomorrow, you can wait. You only need to fill it in once, and you don't need to fill it in. We would love for you to fill it in, but it is not required. But if you would like to, you only need to do it once. So if you're planning to attend tomorrow, you can wait till then. If you can only join us today, please do take a minute to fill that out and share some feedback with us so we can plan hopefully an even better event for next year. We would really appreciate it. Day 2 tomorrow, as I said, English programming is going to start at 12:30 tomorrow. So same as today, 12:30 to 3:30. It will be the same Zoom link as today's session, so you don't need to re-register or anything like that. We will also be hosting SP des Arts Français tomorrow from 12 to 12:30, so just before the English programming starts. Alors, si vous parlez français ou vous voulez pratiquer votre français, nous espérons que vous nous rejoindrez demain à 12h pour quelques mises à jour en français. If you do not speak French, we will see you at 12:30, but in that case, don't be alarmed if you join and a few minutes early and things are already seemingly in full swing and everyone's speaking French. We will transition over to English shortly once you join. Tomorrow we will have some more lightning talks. We will have some updates from the Scholars Portal team, and we will of course have the beloved pet parade. So you'll definitely want to tune in for that. I can confirm it's an excellent lineup this year. As always, that's it from us today. If you have any questions, please just send us an email, help@scholarsportal.info. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day and evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.